Well, we're back to volume 6 of Heaven Official's Blessing. I would like to have pep in my step, but the last set of chapters was pretty rough. I usually make a preview for Discord over on Patreon, and it's usually like a minute long, and I'll take chunks of my reaction from the set. But last week I didn't have much to cite from the actual reaction itself. It was a minute of my conversation about it because it was just heartbreaking and really sad. And Xie Lian has decided that now that they have nothing to pawn, except for maybe the golden belt that he's gave to Feng Xin, so they really don't have anything to pawn, and he doesn't want to go ask Feng Xin for the belt that he's probably already given away to Zhang Lan. We just don't know it yet. My theory is that Xie Lian's possibly going to go steal money or steal things, steal medicine, steal food, because now they can't afford to buy it. And it's like, well, it's just very sad. It's very heartbreaking. We are nearing we're not quite to the halfway point, but we will definitely be over it after these chapters. And this volume's just been really, really sad so far. I was like, ooh, back in volume 3 and volume 2, it was sad. But I feel that it was sad in like you kind of expected it to be sad. You're like, oh, we're going back to Xie Lian's past. We knew he descended and we knew he fell, so this is that, right? No, that was like the preamble for the fall. That was the glory days. That was the shiny veneer and the big epic battles and the horror and mystery and suspense. This is the real nitty-gritty of it, and seeing someone fall from grace and then just be smashed and steamrolled into the cement. That's basically what these chapters have been. And it's been very sad, and I have a feeling it's going to get a lot sadder. So I'm like, oh no. Hua Cheng, where are you? So I want to talk about the Manhua chapter. Chapter 95 came out today, which is exciting. And then I've got a couple comments I want to go over, but I was like, ooh, I don't know how to feel about these volumes, about these chapters. So we just might as well go ahead and talk about the Manhua chapter itself. I was really happy with Manhua chapter. Star Ember can honestly do no wrong at this point as far as illustrating. And I will say this, Star Ember, from what I recall, is looking back at the chapters that Star Ember is illustrating, they're just at this point picking and choosing what they illustrate. I think that Star Ember's mentality is, well, you guys have read the story. You know what happens. I don't have to illustrate every little single detail. It's just like a highlights reel. Star Ember's Manhua is a highlights reel. Here's all the good stuff, the stuff that you want to see illustrated, and the other stuff will just shoo, forget about that. Because yeah, this chapter went by really, really quickly in the Manhua. I read it in like 5 minutes. I was like, that was it. Now I gotta wait 2 weeks. But the illustrations are worth it because it's just like, mwah. I do love Hua Cheng's like buff daddy look that he has going on here. He looks a lot like Lan Chanchu, which is ironic because he's very irritated at Lan Chanchu right now. But like with the sleeves rolled up and everything, it looks like a Lan Chanchu. He has like a high ponytail, looks like a Barbie. It's kind of funny. We'll talk about that in the comments a second. But I think it was Millipop that was like, oh, would Hua Cheng and Xie Lian go see Barbie? I'm like, they'd see the Oppenheimer and Barbie double feature. Let's be real. Xie Lian would be the one that wants to see Oppenheimer, though. But I do love this illustration of all the ghosts. The ghosts from Qirong just circling Hua Cheng like they're gonna get him. And we all know as the audience, we're like, yeah, sure. And Hua Cheng just like completely ignores them. He just like puts the rope down, ignores the ghosts, and just like gives this little humph with his little fang sticking out, which is really super cute. And then just slams Qirong into the ground, which now, the funny thing is we just got off of a set of chapters a few weeks ago of Hua Cheng creating all these statues to revere Xie Lian and like worship him. And then he's seeing Xie Lian's own flesh and blood use those statues in such a demeaning way and like resting his foot up on them like he's in a movie theater. It's obvious why Hua Cheng would be very upset. And it also adds to when he gets so upset at Mu Qing and Feng Xin for trying to touch the statues of Xie Lian, why he reacts the way he does with Hua Cheng. It's a nice little parallel back to that. I'm glad we're going back to it. But man, if you look at the illustration here of Hua Cheng like holding Qirong up by his bun, he does look a lot like Xie Lian. Even with the mask on, like the way that his hair sits and the way his face is chiseled out, it looks a lot like Xie Lian, but just like the more gross ghost version of it, right? And Hua Cheng's like, are you seeking death? I'm like, ugh. And so then, yeah, and just slams him down, slams his face down, looking so pissed off. Meanwhile, Xie Lian's like, Hey, what are we doing? I just love that we, the audience, know how mad Hua Cheng is, and we get why he would be mad, and Xie Lian's so oblivious that he's just like, I don't understand. And he's like, there are things in this world that can never be stopped, like the sun setting in the west, for example, or you stopping me. I can't. Or elephants crushing ants under their feet, or me claiming your life. I forgot about that line, but it's one of my favorite Hua Cheng lines. He's like, as sure as the sun sets in the west, he's like, I'm going to beat the shit out of you. Love it. And I love it. He just keeps slamming him down, just like in the novel, just keeps bashing his head in. But of course, because it's Star Ember, it looks very pretty. even when that's happening, he falls with style. He falls elegantly into the ground. It's great. But I just love that he's changed back into his form of Hua Cheng as he does this with Qirong. It's really good. And so then meanwhile, everybody starts to leave, and Xie Lian's like, oh, nobody move, everybody stay here, don't just run, the ghosts will get you. I like Xie Lian in the yellow robes, and then he has Ru Yi tied around his neck. It's super cute, I like it. And then he sees everybody running off, and we see Guzi and his dad as Xie Lian's calling for them. And then he's like, Sun Long, what we doing? Like, what we doing, Sun Long? Why we being this way? And we cut back to him. How did Prince Anla die? Yep. And like, I like that Hua Cheng, who knows the answer to these questions, is asking Qirong to get him to oust it so that Xie Lian will be, put back in the side of innocence. And we know that Lan Chanchu is listening. He's there. So he's trying to get Qirong to confess. And that's probably what the next chapter is going to be about, is Qirong confessing to him doing the deed and leading the gilded banquet, which Xie Lian, of course, Xie Lian doesn't want out because he's like, oh, no, it's my fault. Don't blame anybody else. Trying to take matters into his own hands. And Hua Cheng doesn't like that because he's like, you didn't do it. So quit trying to take blame for something you weren't responsible for. So I love that Xie Lian at this point, God, back in volume 2, doesn't know why Hua Cheng's sticking up for him like this. And this shot's so great. I love the idea of Xie Lian being like, what's the matter with you? As he like has his hand on Hua Cheng, and there's a statue of Xie Lian kneeling with Qirong in front of him. And I like that you can see the statue of Xie Lian, the feet are bare. They're like bare feet, like a peasant. Interesting. And he's like, calm down, don't be angry. And I just love this moment where he like pats Hua Cheng, and Hua Cheng's like, oh my God, my gege's touching me. but Hua Cheng like makes him like freeze in that moment. He like makes Xie Lian freeze to where he can't move, which, you know what? Xie Lian's had that happen a lot to him in this story. He's been frozen quite a bit. Mu Qing's done it with the little charm now. Hua Cheng's done it at this point. Xie Lian at this point should just be like, just carry me around like a, cardboard cutout, I guess. But yeah, he freezes him. And then I love the idea that, again, Hua Cheng's asking, tell me, how did Prince Anla die? I'll ask you one more time. And you can see the mask crack. You can see the mask crack now. And if you tilt your head just right, you can see Qirong. His face looks like Xie Lian's, but his eyes are a little bit more sinister. His eyes aren't doughy like Xie Lian's, which I like because Qirong is not a doughy-eyed character. But I like the idea that he doesn't look exactly like Xie Lian, but the face structure is the same. It's just his eyes are a wee bit different. And then Xie Lian's face, as Hua Cheng is slamming him into the ground, Xie Lian's face, he's like, well, I'm not going to stop you. I love that Xie Lian's frozen. He can't do anything. And he just sits there. I love that his eyes are closed. Like the way Star Ember draws Xie Lian being like, I guess I'll let this happen. It's really funny. And then, yeah, Hua Cheng just lifts Xie Lian up over his shoulder. I love Xie Lian's like little face of, oh, what are we going to do? And he just does it with one arm. I love that Hua Cheng is like, I can lift you up, Gege, with one arm. And Xie Lian's like, I'm not that light. I love it as he tosses the little Daruma doll, as he tosses the Daruma that is clearly Lan Chanchu onto the ground. So my guess is in the next chapter, Lan Chanchu's going to pop out and we're going to have that whole deal where he spouts out, like, what did you do? And then Qirong admits what happened at the Gilded Banquet. But yeah, what a great chapter. I really liked the Manhua chapter. The illustrations were great. I love Hua Cheng just asserting his alpha dominance in this moment and how much he hates Qirong. It's great. I get sad every time I think that we're going to be abandoning Qirong in the story, I'm like, oh, dang, we're not going to see him again. And then I remember, no, wait, we are. Because he follows Xie Lian around the entire story. We're going to see lots of him. I'm really, really excited. Today has been a very important day for my patients, though, because the audio drama, as you all know, is coming out again. It's going to be the revised version, so I'm waiting until I'm done with this story and these reactions to go back to the audio drama. Kind of like what I did with Modao Zushi. I did some of the audio dramas for Modao Zushi around the same time as the novel readings, but some were done without it, I think. So because it's the revised edition, I don't want to get into those audio dramas until I get done with this story. So that's the goal anyway. But that being said, I was really excited because at first I was like, oh, we'll get to hear Hua Cheng, we'll get to hear Qirong's voice, because I'm sure, well, we'll probably get into Qirong in the Donghua that's coming out this fall. And the Donghua is coming out this fall. By the way, I just like, it's a riches upon riches of heaven officials' blessing have just come down in the last few weeks being announced. So yeah, in October, like in a month, the season 2 of the Donghua is coming out. It's going to work out perfectly because it's going to be right around the time that Link Click ends. That Donghua is going to come out, so I can just replace my Monday slot and have Modao Zushi, or not Modao Zushi, but MXTX Mondays with Heaven Official's Blessing and the Donghua for season 2. So that'll be fun. But the audio drama is probably going to come out by the time I get to Scumville and Self-Saving System. I'll probably do them at the same time. But I was really getting excited because I'm like, oh, I'll get to hear Qirong's voice in the audio drama, and everybody was like, well, you're gonna have to wait. And I was like, and then there was a preview, I guess, of all of the calamities, and Bai Wuxiang's voice was on there, and I was like, oh, I want to hear it. And they were like, no, Romania, there's some lines said in there that you haven't read yet, you can't hear it. And I was like, I felt like a kid that asked to go get a toy from the toy store, and everybody was like, nah, that's not Christmas yet. And I was like, I don't want to wait till Christmas, Santa. I want to hear Bai Wuxiang's voice now. But I can be really patient. I think, as you all probably know by this point, I can be incredibly patient. And so it will be worth it to hear it when I can. So there's that. But I've got a couple comments to tie in before we start this chapter set. Holy Milk, 1867, implied that the injuries that the ghosts have had or had at the time of their death do not heal. So they go with them when they become ghosts. So, for example, the scars on Yushi's throat, the fact that that Shanji has her legs broken, those things that happened while they were mortal transfer into when they are ghosts. So I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, right? Makes sense. The thing with Hua Cheng makes it a little bit more complicated because he's a little ghost fire. So we don't exactly know what happened to his body. We're not sure. He's just like a little ghost fire. We don't know what happened to his body when he died. Apparently it wasn't anything that carries with him until he's Hua Cheng, or does it and he's just hiding it as Hua Cheng. But if that's the case, then why couldn't, Shanji hide it herself? I guess you have to be a supreme to do that. Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, I thought that was interesting to note. And then Holy Milk also said that technically Ruyi has left Xie Lian's body before. Back in volume 3, when Xie Lian had Ruyi watch over Qirong, they were separated. But the idea of the dream sequence was that it was unlikely Ruyi would abandon Xie Lian in times of peril. So that's why it was kind of a nightmare scenario, is that it's not the fact that Ruyi wasn't with Xie Lian, but the fact that it didn't come to his rescue. Interesting. Ekfok09, some of these usernames, said that Hua Cheng is technically 190 centimeters. He's a tall dude. Xie Lian is 178 centimeters, and Yin Yu is somewhere in between. I'm like the perfect height for Xie Lian and Hua Cheng to kiss. Like just the perfect little height there. Zuri Kerjoseph said that Jun Wu, they pointed out this fact that I kind of forgot about. Jun Wu was originally supposed to go to Mount Tonglu and take care of all of this because, as he said, there were no heavenly officials in the upper court to do anything. And I'm like, well, it's funny you say that, Jun Wu, because guess what? They're all at Mount Tonglu. It's like the ultimate irony. Jun Wu's like, well, I guess I'll go to Mount Tonglu because none of the other heavenly officials are around to do so. And the irony upon all ironies is, yeah, they're at Mount Tonglu. That's why they're not getting a hold of you. Like Ling Wen's somewhere there with Bai Jing. Feng Xin and Mu Qing have been there. Yin Yu is there. The only ones that aren't technically there is like, the Windmaster, and we have no clue where they are. So yeah, it's really funny. And it makes me wonder, like, what if Junwu had gone? Like, we know Bai Wuxiang has been after Xie Lian for some weird reason. What would Bai Wuxiang have done if Junwu had shown up instead of Xie Lian? Would Bai Wuxiang have gone to the upper court to torment him? Would he have somehow made it into the heavenly realm? How does that even work? It seems like such a stroke of fate that Xie Lian ended up there, but that makes me like kind of suspicious of Junwu just a teeny bit, because I'm like, because Junwu came to Xie Lian and Hua Cheng to tell them that he was going to Mount Tonglu and for them to go back up to the heavenly realm. I'm like, now that I think about it, it's like, why didn't Junwu just go to Mount Tonglu and have a messenger come and get Xie Lian, bring him up to the upper court, and then be like, oh, hey, while you're here, by the way, Junwu's left to go to Mount Tonglu, you gotta take his place. Bye. And then Xie Lian would have been like, what? What's going on? And would have been stuck there. Why did he go to the trouble of going down there when he probably knew Xie Lian was gonna volunteer to go to Mount Tonglu? Suspicious. Am I suspicious of Junwu at this point? I don't know. I'm kind of neutral about it because he, destroyed Bai Wuxiang supposedly, but then he didn't. And that whole thing with him going to Mount Tonglu and then not going, it's interesting. And maybe it's just random coincidence, but it just seems to have all worked out in the Goshi and Bai Wuxiang's favor. So I'm going to put a pin in that for later, I think. Lu points out that Hua Cheng worships Xie Lian as this god of pureness, but yet he feels disgusted with himself because he has these, quote, perverted thoughts. And that makes a lot of sense. Hua Cheng, thinks of himself as ugly and perverse, and he's like, I shouldn't think these horrible things about my gege, but, I can't help it. The thing that's so funny is that Xie Lian, as Lu points out, is flawed. They are not perfect, and it's mutual. They kind of feel that they don't have perverse thoughts towards Hua Cheng, but they mutually like them. So it's interesting. I feel like, in a way, it's kind of making this commentary about putting your idols up on pedestals and mixing that with religion, and it's interesting. I agree with Lou, and they're like, I wish I could sit down with MXTX and ask them about that theme, and maybe we'll get more on that as the story goes. I'm sure we will. SQQLBH314 talked about how Pei Ming needed to be there the whole time. In that giant section, chapters 175 through 179, a lot of this problem could have been avoided if Pei Ming had been there, because Pei Ming would have just sat down with Feng Xin and Mu Qing and been like, hey, bros, look. He would be like, look, bros, Hua Cheng and Xie Lian, they're into each other. It's weird. I think it's kind of hot, but, let's let them just be, man. Can you imagine? I think Pei Ming would have sorted things out a lot better and would have, grabbed Feng Xin and Mu Qing and been like, okay, go, guys, I got this, and, ran off with them. If only Pei Ming had been there, I think things would have, solidified over. It would have been great, but I'm glad it worked out in the end. And then SQQLBH had this great scenario of, Hua Cheng's had this cave with all these statues in it and this basic shrine with the murals and everything. What if the Blackwater stumbled across it while he was on Mount Tonglu? What if the Blackwater stumbled across the cave and was just like, this is weird. But he didn't say anything because it's the Blackwater, it's Heshan. And so he's just like, well, this is kind of weird. And then later, after he becomes a Supreme Ghost and him and Hua Cheng get together and Heshan realizes that Hua Cheng likes Xie Lian, he's like, hey, did you at one point in Mount Tonglu make a cave filled with statues of Xie Lian? And Hua Cheng's like, what if I did? And Heshan's like, oh, no reason, just hypothetically. He doesn't want to acknowledge it. I need that. I need that moment where Heshan's like, oh, no reason, just seeing if that was a thing. And Hua Cheng's like, it's not, don't ask about it. And Heshan's like, no problem, didn't see anything. I need that in my life. And then finally, Anime Annie talks about Mu Qing and Feng Xin's view of Xie Lian versus Hua Cheng's view. And I think it's a really good point that several of you commented on this, about how Mu Qing and Feng Xin view Xie Lian as the prince of Shanla still. They don't recognize him as an 800-year-old scrap collector. They still view him, back when they were with him, as a teenager. And whereas Hua Cheng kind of sees him as he is now. And I think that's sort of it's a trope in a lot of literature where the childhood friends sometimes only see the character as they saw them in childhood, but they don't see the growth and development they've reached as adults. And Xie Lian's been an adult for a long time, and Mu Qing and Feng Xin just haven't seen all of the growth that he's had throughout the years, whereas Hua Cheng kind of has. So it's a nice little dynamic there. I really like it. But yeah, I've talked for 20 minutes at this point. Long enough. I'm just delaying the inevitable, which is diving into these chapters. We're doing chapters 184 to 186 today, which is pages 163 to 200. I'm really excited. It's 3 chapters. We've had several weeks of just 2 chapters and then that big old 5-chapter chunk. So it's nice to get back to, like, I'm used to 3 chapters, so it's nice to get back to some normalcy. We're going to do that this week and next week, so that'll be exciting. But yeah, Xie Lian said, don't follow me. Don't mind me. Don't follow me. I think he's going to go try steal some medicine to bring back for his dad, but we'll see, I guess. So in any case, I hope you all are excited for this chapter set. I very much am too. We're going to dive into chapters 184 to 186 of Heaven Official's Blessing, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Chapter 184, Blocking the Mountain Path. The Crown Prince fails in robbery. So we're not going to steal medicine. Well, we are. We're going to try to rob people for money. Yay! He exhorted over and over to make sure Feng Xin would stay behind to guard the king and the queen while he himself exited the small, dilapidated cottage. As he walked, he kept looking back, his heart racing fast. After walking a long way, he finally relaxed when he was certain Feng Xin didn't follow. Steadying himself, having walked and stopped for over 10 miles, Xie Lian finally found a place where he felt the ideal location, a fairly deserted, secluded mountain road. Xie Lian scanned his surroundings. There was no one around. Then he covered his face with a white silk band, wrapping it tightly and securely before he leapt onto a tree to hide himself. He held his breath and focused. The next step would be wait for travelers to pass by. That's right. His way was the so-called steal from the rich and give to the poor. Oh, so he's just being Robin Hood. You know, no big deal. In the past, Xie Lian had only heard of these worldly vigilantes who'd steal from the rich to give to the poor from books and plays. He'd never done it himself, and he never thought to do it, since his original belief was this: no matter how much it was prettied up, no matter how just the reason, robbery was robbery, stealing was stealing. Otherwise, by Xie Lian's physical prowess, never mind flying across rooftops to pilfer smaller things, murdering guards and cleaning out an entire treasury wouldn't be anything difficult. But now he'd reached this point. There was really no other way. If he must say so, to rob was a teeny bit better than to steal, probably because the former was still considerably out in the open. After much eternal dilemma, Xie Lian still slapped the face of his former self and planned to steal others' wealth in order to give to his own poverty. This was the fastest way. And at this point, he's, desperate for time because he knows his father's getting really, really sick. And so he can't afford to wait around. He's like, I got to do this now. Xie Lian perched on the tree. The moon was hiding, the wind bellowing, and it was all deserted all around, the empty of the living, yet his heart was thumping wildly. Even when facing the most violent of beasts, Xie Lian had never been this nervous. When he dug out a cold and hard bun, his hand was slightly trembling. If you could still be picky when it came to food, it could only mean you weren't genuinely hungry. When Xie Lian understood this, he suddenly became used to the taste of steamed buns. That's why at the very beginning on the cart, he has the bun wrapped up in his sleeve and he doesn't pay it no mind. Winter was fast approaching and the nights were extremely cold. Xie Lian munched at the cold bun and puffed out mouthfuls of white breaths. Since he didn't want to be seen, Xie Lian could never consider a place where there'd be more people and specifically picked a desolate area. He waited for a full 4 hours before travel came along, strolling slowly from the ends of the mountain road. Xie Lian was energized, stuffed down that bun in a couple bites, and focused on the traveler who was approaching slowly. Then he discovered it was an old man. Such an elderly man, but he was dressed fresh and bright, so he should be fairly wealthy. However, he was of course not within Xie Lian's scope of consideration. Xie Lian couldn't tell if he was disappointed or relieved, but either way, he resolutely decided to ignore the old man and let him go, continuing to wait for the next person. 2 hours later, Xie Lian's feet were going numb from squatting, the lower half of his body practically frozen, before a second person appeared. When he saw the figure was also walking slowly, he wondered, could it be another senior? When that figure finally came closer, he discovered it wasn't a senior, but a youth. The youth appeared simple and good-natured, his face covered with smiles, and the reason he was walking slowly was he was carrying a heavy bag of rice. Xie Lian's palms were sweating. He said to himself, do I attack? After a moment's hesitation, he gave up in the end. The reason he gave up was because this young man's clothes were patched. The straw shoes on his feet were worn through, exposing his toes, obviously from a poor household. He must have looked so happy because there was finally a bag of rice to fill his stomach, and perhaps his family had starved for many days, and perhaps his bag of rice was bought after selling the only ox in his household. If he was robbed, wouldn't he fall into despair? Xie Lian imagined all sorts of scenarios on his own. It wasn't until after he thought maybe he could have just taken half a bag of rice. By then the young man was long gone. Thus, Xie Lian resolutely decided that he wouldn't think of it anymore and continued to wait until the next one. This reminds me of Bungo Stray Dogs. In the first episode of Bungo Stray Dogs, the main character, in the very first episode of the series, the main character is, he's starving, and so he's deciding whether he should rob someone, and he goes through all these scenarios, and these people just keep coming by, and he's like, well, not you, and he ends up not being able to rob anybody. It's what it's reminding me of. He perched on this tree like this and waited helplessly for many hours, from the darkened night to the break of day. In that time, there were over a dozen passerby who passed through this mountain road, yet every time when Xie Lian was about to attack, there were always all sorts of reasons why it would be inappropriate to do so, and he'd let him go. Many times he thought, never mind, just go back. There were no bandits who'd rob him at all. It'd be a miracle if he was actually fruitful. But when he thought about how there was no more food or medicine if he went back, he forced himself to keep waiting. After almost half a day, finally, far in the distance of the mountain road came the last traveler. It was a middle-aged man, donned in fine clothing, neither wealthy nor noble, his appearance savage and greasy, rather obnoxious. Xie Lian could tell he wasn't anyone good with just a glance. But one mustn't judge a book by its cover, Xie Lian couldn't help but think. What if this man only appears savage but is actually a good person? Even if he's loaded, did that warrant getting robbed? As if he was fighting his internal struggles, a sudden growling came from his stomach and it woke him from his stupor, and Xie Lian sighed inwardly. Never mind, I can't bother with that much. You're it. Making up his mind, he leapt down from the tree and shouted, stand still! To have a masked man cutting off the road halfway. That man was surprised and cried in alarm, well, who are you? Hiding here sneakily with your face hidden. What are you planning? Xie Lian forced himself to say, give, but in the end, there was a hurdle in his mind. And he stammered a couple times before finally squeezing out, give me all the money on your person. The man widened his mouth, leapt 3 feet high, and screamed, somebody help, robbers! Then he turned and ran. More than his escape, Xie Lian was even more worried that his cries would alert others. While the place was in fact already a desolate, barren mountain, and there was a low chance of anyone showing up, and even if anyone did show up, he could just flee. Thieves had guilty consciences after all. He immediately yelled, stop, don't yell anymore. As if the man would listen to him, he fled and ran into the woods and then yelped, oh, tragically. Xie Lian was afraid there were beasts in the woods attacking the man. He cried quickly, oh, wait, watch out. Yet unexpectedly, when he caught up, he saw he was instantly stupefied, his face blanching rapidly. Within the woods, there was already a group of people, and they were all looking his direction. When Xie Lian looked closer, he noticed something was off. They weren't people at all. The middle-aged man didn't see them at all and was still in a panic, and within that group there seemed to be some familiar faces. Of course they were familiar. He had seen a number of them in the heavenly capital before, in the past, some from the upper court and some from the lower court. They were all heavenly officials. The man yelped tragically earlier because he tripped and fell, and his hands were gripping a large bundle of protection charms while he chanted to himself, oh my God, come save me, quick! All of the gods that he was crying for really came as he wished. Right at this moment, countless heavenly officials' eyes were all staring at Xie Lian intently, freezing him on the spot with their gaze. When that man saw the strange masked robber was frozen in a daze, he quickly crawled up and ran off. Xie Lian couldn't move a step to go give chase. His entire body was stiff, drenched in a cold sweat, his heart filled with horror. That's right, horror. He can only pray that this white silk band was wrapped around his fate tightly enough that those heavenly officials he'd been acquainted with in the past wouldn't recognize him. However, things would never go as one hoped, and one of the heavenly officials looked him up and down before he said in surprise, isn't this your Royal Highness? Oh, it really is. Why is your Highness here and dressed like this too? Xie Lian's heart was sinking deeper and deeper. It was going to sink into the bottom of the earth. That man was screaming earlier, help, robbery, robber. A robber chasing him? That robber is your Highness? Oh my heavens, your Highness, you would actually do something like this? Hearing this, Xie Lian almost fainted on the spot. He didn't know how much time went by before he croaked, I He wanted to say something, but the words weren't coming out. They were stuck in his throat. The faces of the heavenly officials were also unreadable. A moment later, one of the heavenly officials patted his shoulders. "Oh, don't worry, Your Highness. We understand." Xie Lian received those pats. They weren't hard, but he almost lost his balance. He tried again. The heavenly official laughed out loud. "You're only doing this because you've got it really hard. It's understandable. Don't you worry. We won't tell anybody about this." The reason why things were so hard to say was also because of this reason. Since the other party said it out loud first, then he completely didn't know what else he could add. It was a moment later before he mumbled, "All right, thank you. I'm going to head back now. I'm leaving." He didn't know how he left either. Either way, when he finally was conscious of himself, he was already standing in an empty mountain road again, and it was the cold night breeze of winter that snapped him out of it. Only then did Xie Lian realize what a horrifying thing that had just happened now. He, Xie Lian, the crown prince of Shanla, a robber. How did it come to this? The Xie Lian at this moment was filled with regrets. The him of the past must have been mad to have thought of robbing the roads, and now things were out of control. Why was he so unlucky that even though nothing was accomplished, he was still caught red-handed? Xie Lian had never encountered something like this in his past life, so he was at a complete loss of what to do. He was burning up from head to toe, his mind completely muddled, and he hid his face in his hands. If only time could go backwards. He was even willing to use his bountiful health and cultivation in exchange for it. Just as he was deep in distress, his peripheral vision, there was suddenly a blurry white silhouette up ahead. Xie Lian was instantly startled, whipping his head up. "Who goes there?" When he looked up, that figure instantly disappeared, and cold sweat covered his body again. Although he didn't see the man's face, he felt it was the face of that man seemed to have been a mask. Nevertheless, after scanning his surroundings, he didn't see trace of anyone, and Xie Lian couldn't help but suspect perhaps the figure he saw was nothing more than a hallucination in his moment of panic. Whether it was, he didn't dare stay any longer and hurried down the mountain. Interesting. So was it Bai Wuxiang or what? After he returned, Feng Xin had already waited up for him for almost half a day. The moment he saw him, he exclaimed, "Your Highness, where did you run off to? What ideas did you come up with?" Xie Lian didn't dare tell him. He couldn't tell anyone, especially Feng Xin. Xie Lian couldn't imagine at all what Feng Xin, who believed so faithfully at his utmost righteousness and morals, would think if he found out. He could only hope the incident would be forever buried in his heart and rot in his stomach. Xie Lian replied ambiguously, "Oh, nothing." "What? Then why have you been gone for so long?" Xie Lian's mind was going numb. "Don't ask anymore. I didn't do anything." Feng Xin was bewildered, but no matter how he questioned, Xie Lian refused to answer. As the servant, it wasn't his place to push, and he could only say in a whisper, "So do we go busk tomorrow?" "I'm not going out anymore," Xie Lian replied. He was now thrown in complete chaos, his mind filled with impossible worries. What if he bumped into that middle-aged man? What if the entire city was now searching for him? Feng Xin also noticed him off looking and said, "You must be tired. How about this? Your Highness, just stay in. I'll go myself. You focus on training." However, he didn't know that Xie Lian now had no mind to train or cultivate either. Xie Lian was focused on cultivation at first because that was the only way there might be a chance of returning to the upper court, but now he was terrified at the prospect of returning to the upper court. Although those junior officials said they wouldn't tell anybody, would they really not tell? Could this affair have already reached the ears of everyone in the heavens? When he thought this was a possibility, Xie Lian couldn't breathe. There was absolutely no way he could endure being branded with this, to the point that by the entire upper and lower court, by the entire mortal realm even. In his exhaustion, Xie Lian passed out heavily. The slumber was unsettled, and he turned back and forth, invaded by unknown nightmares. And when he jolted awake in shock and looked outside the window, the skies were already dark. Feng Xin wasn't around. He must have gone out to busk on his own and hadn't yet returned, and in the room next to him came hushed voices and soft coughing of the king and queen. Xie Lian laid on the floor. Now that he was awake, he couldn't help but keep thinking, if that incident really was spread around, how would his parents react if they found out? How shocked would they be? The king might stomp his feet in outrage, yelling as he spat blood that he was the shame of Shanla. The queen, on the other hand, would definitely not yell at him, but she would for sure be extremely anguished, because the child she loved had brought them shame. Having thought this, Xie Lian was having trouble breathing again. He needed to find somewhere where he could be by himself and be calm, so he rolled off the straw mat and charged out, running blindly for over 10 miles with the frigid winds blowing at his face. He didn't dare stop anywhere where there were people, because he constantly felt the others were staring at him, judging him for how unkempt he was. Finally, he came to a graveyard with not a single soul before he stopped in his step. This night was colder than the night before, and having only come here did Xie Lian notice his cheeks and hands were practically frostbitten, his body shivering. It wasn't just the cold, there was also horror and panic. Xie Lian hugged his arms unconsciously, puffed a few mouthfuls of hot air, swept his eyes, and discovered right before a tombstone there were 2 jars of wine being offered. It seemed the master of this tombstone was someone who loved wine when they were alive, so after death others would bring them wine when they came to sweep the grave. Xie Lian crouched down. He had never drank wine before, but he'd heard people say that wine could warm the body and help forget. Oh my God, no, Xie Lian, if you've never drank before and you've not ate all day, this is a very bad decision. After a moment's hesitation, he suddenly reached for a wine jar, yanked off the cork, and started pouring the contents down his throat. Oh my God, Xie Lian, no, no, no. This wine wasn't any fine wine. It was cheap and large in quantity, the taste pungent and strong. Xie Lian swallowed a few large mouthfuls and started choking on it, coughing, but he really did seem to have gotten a bit warmer. He wiped his cheek and sat himself down on the ground, hugged the jar, and continued to chug the wine in large mouthfuls. Oh. In his daze, he seemed to have noticed a small ball of haunting little ghost fire coming flying out, going around in circles around him, twirling about, looking quite anxious. Xie Lian only cared to focus on his drinking and didn't react at all. The ball of ghost fire appeared to be using all of its might to come close to him, but because it was nothing but hollow flames, every time it came near, it would just pass right through his body, never able to actually touch him. Oh my God, it was trying to console him. Upon finishing a jar, Xie Lian was already tipsy and groggy, his drunken eyes slackened. When he saw it darting here and there, looking rather pitiful, but also really funny, he couldn't help but pff out loud and laugh, his arm resting on the edges of the wine jar. What are you doing? The ball of ghost fire instantly froze in midair. It's Hua Cheng, it has to be, but also, oh my God, this chapter already, nope, I nearly cried, nope. Chapter 185, 33 heavenly officials fight over auspicious land. Were the heavenly officials that saw Xie Lian as the robber, was there 33 of them? And were those 33 the one that Hua Cheng got rid of? Oh, you are joking. Oh my God! Okay. Xie Lian asked, "Is this your grave? Am I drinking your wine?" He was a drunken mess and didn't really hear clearly if the ghost fire said anything. Oh no, he can't tell. He just thought the master of the grave was displeased, trying to chase him away. He's like, "I'll get it, I'll go." He grumbled. He hugged the wine jar and crawled up, swaying and wobbly as he took steps, yet unexpectedly he didn't get very far before he lost his footing and thud! He fell all over himself. It turns out there was a giant pit in this graveyard. It was probably a pre-dug to prepare for the burial of the deceased, but the deceased hadn't yet been buried before Xie Lian himself came tumbling in. Oh my God, just the irony of Xie Lian falling into a grave site. Xie Lian's forehead knocked on the outer edges of the pit, and it hurt, worsening his dizziness, his head throbbing. He was woozy for a while before he struggled to get up, both his hands muddied and bloodied with scrapes and cuts everywhere. He held out his hands and looked at them without even registering anything. Oh no. And he tried to climb out of the pit. However, he just downed an entire jar of wine. His limbs were limp and he couldn't exert any power. So while he attempted to climb out a few times, he'd slip down every time. Xie Lian fell back to the bottom of the pit and glared at the hiding moon in the cloudy night sky, for a bit growing very angry. This pit wasn't even that deep, so why couldn't he climb out no matter how he tried? The more he thought, the angrier he became, and he started mumbling in spite of himself, "What the fuck?" Xie Lian had never cursed before. This was the first time such words came out of his mouth, but the curious thing was, after he cursed, the stifling tension in his chest seemed to have dispersed instantly. Thus, like a child who tasted sweets, Xie Lian clung to the side of the walls of the burial pit and used all his strength to yell with a deafening voice, "Oh, fucking damn it!" He slapped the ground, yelled, "Is there anyone there? Is there anyone who can help pull me out?" Of course there wasn't anyone. There was only a small ball of haunting ghost fire, blazing unceasingly. After Xie Lian had fallen, the little ball of ghost fire came rushing over, seeming to want to grab him, but it could never make contact. Oh my God! He's seen Xie Lian at his worst! And he still worships him and loves him! And he couldn't touch him! Xie Lian didn't bother with all that and said angrily, "Someone might as well just come and bury me." Cursing as he willed, he continued to climb. He finally climbed out using his own power, but he was already incredibly unkempt. He laid on the ground, huffing and breathing laboriously. It took a brief moment before he flipped over, hugging himself and curled up. "I'm so cold," he whispered. His voice was tiny, afraid that anyone would overhear. However, the ghost fire heard, and it came flying, pressing itself against his body, its flame suddenly much brighter than before, like it was burning itself up with all it had. Still, a ghost fire was cold. No matter how close it pressed, no matter how it could burn itself to ashes, it wouldn't be able to bring a sliver of warmth to the living. In his days, Xie Lian seemed to have heard a tiny and feeble voice. The voice was so close yet far, like a dream but not, and it cried in despair, "Oh God, please wait for me, please wait for me, please give me a little more time. Let me. God, is it calling for me?" But even if it was praying to him, it'd be pointless. Even when he was a god, he couldn't do anything. Now that he wasn't a god, there was even less he could do. "Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness!" It was Feng Xin pushing that woke Xie Lian up. He blinked, opened his eyes laboriously, and found he was lying in a small alleyway. Feng Xin's face was hanging from above when he noticed Xie Lian was awake, and he finally let out a breath of relief, but soon it was replaced with traces of anger. "Your Highness, what is going on? What's with you? Running off on your own for days without a word. If you don't come back soon, I won't be able to keep lying to their majesties any longer." Days? When the words left his lips, he found his throat was dry, his voice hoarse, and his temple was throbbing, his head aching like it was going to split. He seemed to recall something, but at the same time he couldn't remember. "That's right, 2 days. Where did you go, and why were you running like mad just now?" Was he drunk for 2 days? Was he at some wild graveyard? Why was he lying here? And judging from Feng Xin's tone, a sense of foreboding filled Xie Lian. What did I do? "You were possessed. Crashing stalls everywhere, beating people up. You even went up to stop the patrolling Yongin soldiers. I don't know what else you've done before that." When Xie Lian heard he went even to stop Yongin soldiers, he was taken aback. "I went to stop the soldiers, then what happened to the soldiers?" "Well, thank goodness I bumped into you and stopped you," Feng Xin said. "And you look like this. So they thought you must be some crazy drunkard. They only yelled at you but didn't bother. Otherwise, you'd be dead for sure. What happened to you? Why does it look like you drank?" Xie Lian looked down at himself, and he was covered from head to toe with mud and grime. He scratched his head, and it was all so messy, and like a criminal who was about to be dragged down to be interrogated and executed. He certainly did appear very much like a crazy drunkard who slept on the streets all day. After a moment's silence, Xie Lian crawled to his feet and replied vaguely, "I did drink a bit." Feng Xin couldn't wrap his head around this. "Well, how can you drink? Just how much did you drink to be drunk for 2 days? Seeing Feng Xin's look of disbelief, Xie Lian was irritated for no good reason. He walked on ahead. "I already said I didn't drink much, just a bit. Nothing's up. Why can't I drink?" Feng Xin hadn't expected him to answer like this and was stunned for a moment. Then he chased after him. "What do you mean nothing's up? Why, has your Highness forgotten? Drinking breaks the mandate. You can't break any mandates. Otherwise, how can you cultivate? You have to ascend again." The moment he heard ascension and cultivation, Xie Lian didn't want to listen anymore, and he quickened your pace. "Your Highness!" Feng Xin called out. He caught up a moment. After a moment's hesitation, he tried, "Did something happen? Tell me." Hearing Feng Xin question so carefully, Xie Lian opened and closed his mouth, waiting to speak, but was not able. If he didn't tell anyone soon, he just might break down. But he also wasn't sure how Feng Xin was going to react if he told him. He didn't dare to gamble. Seeing him distracted, Feng Xin added, "Oh, for real, it's not like you killed or robbed, so why can't your Highness tell me?" Hearing "it's not like you killed or robbed," Xie Lian instantly felt suffocated. If it could be said that he might have been stirred, that he might have felt a little relieved, then at this moment everything was thoroughly shattered. He lowered his head and turned to keep walking. He replied hazily, "It's nothing, just I'm really tired. He was just about to make an excuse when he noticed something on the side of Feng Xin's cheek, and he stopped in his step. "What's with your face?" Feng Xin felt his cheek, and it seemed to have touched somewhere that hurt and his muscles tensed. The thing on his face was a gash, and one of his arms was also wrapped in bandages, layered and tightly and tied neatly and attentively. It could have been Feng Xin himself who wrapped those bandages, but what Xie Lian was concerned were the injuries underneath the dressings. How did you get hurt? By Feng Xin's abilities, no mortals could have easily harmed him, and it was his arm that was injured too. Feng Xin didn't seem to care. Oh, it's nothing, just some thugs trying to crash the business, that's all. Those local street performers from the other day? Yeah, them. Why did they go crash your show? Xie Lian questioned, but then he understood afterwards. Was it because we admitted defeat that day? But then you still went to bust so they came to chase you out? That was pretty much the whole story. After learning the reason, a sudden rage exploded in Xie Lian. Well, don't go anymore! Xie Lian's voice was hard. However, Feng Xin brushed him off. Who cares about them? I'll go whether they like it or not. The one who admitted defeat was you, not me. I didn't admit defeat, so it doesn't count as going back on my word. I'm going to set up shop there and bust no matter what. Besides, crashing the show sneakily, what else can they do to me? I wasn't prepared this time, but I will be next time. If it comes to fists, I'm not scared of them. Hearing this, a sudden wave of rage that rushed to Xie Lian's head instantly dissipated, and it was replaced by guilt. Feng Xin had been like this while he himself was depressed and wallowing in misery. How could he possibly face this loyal servant that still hadn't abandoned him when things had reached this point? Having thought this, Xie Lian sighed. I'm sorry, Feng Xin. Why is your highness apologizing to me? What rubbish. You're out earning money all by yourself these past couple of days. I'm sorry for your trouble. As long as you focus on your cultivation and ascend again, it'll be worth it, Feng Xin replied. The word ascend came up again, and Xie Lian nodded his head heavily. The king and queen believed Feng Xin's lies and thought Xie Lian had spent the past couple of days out training. When they saw him return, the queen happily cooked a meal as always. Xie Lian didn't have the heart, so he took Feng Xin's bowl over and helped him eat it. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, Feng Xin rose and left bright and early in the morning while Xie Lian remained to cultivate. However, while he'd already pulled himself together and gathered all his energy, he still couldn't focus. Everyone should know this logic. The only way to stand out from the crowd was to study hard. Practice makes perfect. But who in a million could truly work to the point of practice makes perfect? By the same logic, no matter how much he told himself to clear his mind, how could he possibly achieve it just because he told himself to? For the next 10 consecutive days, the progress of his cultivation was at a standstill. Nothing was achieved, and Xie Lian couldn't help but be anxious. Especially since every night when Feng Xin dragged his exhausted body back and he and the queen asked if Xie Lian had made any progress, Xie Lian could feel an inexplicable immense pressure. He didn't dare tell the truth, so he could only vaguely answer that yes, there was progress. And so Feng Xin and the queen were both very happy. But things couldn't go on like this. After 2 months, Xie Lian could no longer allow things to continue the way that they were. One day, when Feng Xin returned in the deep night, the two were eating leftovers from the day before, and as they ate, Xie Lian suddenly turned to him. I'm going to have to leave for a period of time. What? Feng Xin was taken aback as he stuffed his face with rice. Leave? Where are you going? Xie Lian said slowly, I'm going to search for a quiet land filled with spiritual energy and close myself off to cultivate. If a cultivation place was abundant in spiritual energy, then it was significantly beneficial to the cultivator. Before, Xie Lian couldn't make up his mind on whether he should leave his parents and the 2 attendants behind, which is why he never parted for them, but now he changed his mind. Feng Xin didn't think too much about it. However, well, great, your highness. You should have done this a long time ago. Quiet cultivation is the most effective, after all. Xie Lian nodded, paused, and then said, I'll have to trouble you to look after my father and mother while I'm gone. Feng Xin was about to respond, but he suddenly hesitated for a moment. Although it was but a flash, Xie Lian knew him so well. How could he not have noticed that moment of hesitation? Right then, the king bellowed from within the back room, If you must go, then go. This king doesn't need anyone to look after him. Feng Xin and Xie Lian lowered their bowls and chopsticks and looked to the room. It seemed the king hadn't yet rested and heard their exchange, interrupting their conversation. Xie Lian shook his head and whispered, acting tough again. Feng Xin smiled and said, Don't worry, your highness. Of course I'd look after them. But he's in this relationship right now, so God, we'll talk about this. Now he answered so straightforwardly. Still, Xie Lian didn't forget that. Before Feng Xin answered, there was a small moment of hesitation, like he had other concerns. However, when he thought about it, maybe he saw wrong. Other than them, Feng Xin didn't know anyone else, had no other dependents. So what other concerns could he have had? So Xie Lian stopped thinking and changed his mind to considerations for his departure the next day. The next day, Xie Lian carried a simple satchel and temporarily bid farewell to his parents and Feng Xin. He walked for who knows how many tens of miles, eating and sleeping out in the open for days. When he finally found a place, a quiet, deep mountain that was perfect for quiet cultivation, after examining the area, Xie Lian was startled at first, but soon after his heart was filled with joy. Oh, such luck! The feng shui of this area is excellent. I've actually found a most auspicious piece of land. Having been unfortunate up until this point, to have his luck turn so suddenly, Xie Lian couldn't believe it, and had to check and recheck before he was absolutely sure. Indeed, this area was a sacred land brimming with spiritual energy. If he could immerse himself and focus on cultivation for the next few months, surely he could achieve twice the results with half the effort and make exponential progress. It was as if Xie Lian had seen hope, and the gloomy feelings of recent days suddenly cleared and his heart leapt for joy. Father, mother, Feng Xin, wait for me. I'll return very soon. Following along the steep and perilous mountain path and hiking for 7 or 8 hours, Xie Lian finally entered the deep recesses of this spiritual mountain before sunset. Crossing through the dense forest, he could sense clearly that he was coming closer and closer to the source of spiritual energy. Xie Lian's steps were also growing faster and lighter, yet unexpectedly, just as he was picking out a location for his quiet cultivation, there was a clamoring noise of footsteps behind him. How could there be so many feet in such a secluded mountain? Xie Lian looked over unconsciously. He had never expected that with this glance, the smiling hanging off his lips would freeze. Behind him appeared a number of people, 30 of them, about. All different shapes and sizes donned in various attire. However, the one thing they had in common were they were all heavenly officials. A small number of them were officials without rank in the upper court, and the majority of them were officials in the lower court. Among them were the junior officials that had bumped into his failed robbery last time. When they saw Xie Lian, their faces changed and they tugged and elbowed each other, saying something under their breath. As for Xie Lian, when he saw them, immediately his hands started trembling. Both parties stared at each other. It was a brief moment before one of the heavenly officials cleared his throat. Oh, what a coincidence that we'd run into your Royal Highness here. Indeed, why has your Royal Highness come here too? Xie Lian inclined his head lightly, forcing himself to be calm and composed, and responded without any sign of inferiority. I'm here to train. Even though the him today wasn't the him of the past, Xie Lian still tried to use the same tone before he was banished, refusing to allow himself to sound subservient or guilty. The heavenly official smiled. Well, even more of a coincidence. We've come here to train too. Yeah, who knew that we'd all run into each other like here? It turns out Xie Lian wasn't the only one who'd spotted this auspicious land. The group of heavenly officials had also targeted it. Having run into this situation, Xie Lian started hesitating. Would he have to cultivate alongside this many heavenly officials? To be honest, he rejected the idea of cultivating with other heavenly officials from the bottom of his heart. First, he had come to close himself off to cultivate quietly. If he couldn't be by himself and had to be with so many people, then there'd no doubt be disturbances. Some people enjoyed cultivation in groups so they could take care of one another, but Xie Lian had always cultivated quietly on his own. Second, ever since the robbery incident, he'd become ill at ease when he saw heavenly officials he had been acquainted with from the past, feeling like the eyes of others were piercing like needles, tormenting him. Just like right now, he had the delusional feeling they were all watching him with judgment, so he wouldn't be able to focus on cultivation at all. When it came to taking over auspicious lands, there was a first-come, first-served rule. As long as Xie Lian was strong enough, he could very well say that he was there first. Please go find somewhere else to train. However, those few junior officials who bumped into his robbery incident were right before him, so he couldn't act too tough. Besides, it'd also be thuggish of him to chase away so many heavenly officials while keeping the auspicious land for himself. I'm glad that Hua Cheng doesn't have any problem with being thuggish. Even if Xie Lian didn't want to train next to the heavenly officials, there were no other choice. There wasn't any time to go find another place with such plentiful spiritual energy, so Xie Lian could only nod. Yeah, what a coincidence! Then I'll head in first. My lords, you please do as you will. Then he made a move to leave in haste so he could go hide himself in the quietest cave. Yet unexpectedly, just as he turned around, a heavenly official behind him spoke up. Hold up. Xie Lian paused in a step and turned his head back, puzzled. What is it? Those 30-some heavenly officials exchanged looks with one another, some whispering. A moment later, someone stepped out and he smiled. Oh, your highness has taken over a number of auspicious lands in the past. Why don't you let us have this one this time? Xie Lian was stunned for a good while before he understood. What they meant was to have him leave this place. How baffling! What bullies! A rush of blood came charging his head, and Xie Lian thought angrily, well, I was here first, but I didn't ask you all to leave, so why did you all turn around and ask me to leave? But he didn't dare act out. After a moment of silence, the hand holding the strap of his satchel slowly clutched harder. Xie Lian demanded, his voice hard, my lords, what is the meaning of this? One of the heavenly officials said, well, didn't we just say, Your Highness has taken over quite a number of auspicious lands in the past. Xie Lian cut him off. What does that have to do with this? Are you saying that since I've taken a number of spiritual lands in the past, I'm barred from cultivating in spiritual lands? That heavenly official was stumped and stopped speaking, looking embarrassed. Xie Lian tried to remain composed and said, also, I don't quite understand. It's not like everyone can't cultivate here just because I'm here too. Isn't it common to share spiritual lands when cultivating? What's wrong if everyone just minds themselves? Why must you ask me to leave? Just then he heard someone grumble, stop playing ignorant. There's already 30-something of us. If you're cultivating here, what more can the others cultivate? Although that man was instantly pushed down by the others, Xie Lian instantly understood, so that was it. The spiritual energy in a piece of auspicious land was very limited. When cultivating, if someone took over half, then the others who came afterwards could only share the other half. If someone took over 8 parts of it, then the others could only take 2. The stronger one's ability to absorb spiritual energy to use for oneself, the less spiritual energy there'd be for others to use. Those heavenly officials were afraid that if he was around to cultivate, he'd take away a majority of the spiritual energy. What was left would have to be shared among the 30 of them, so there wouldn't be much left for everyone. Having realized this, the boiling blood in Xie Lian's head was charging even more aggressively. He clenched his fists and said coldly, I will cultivate here. Another heavenly official spoke up. Your Highness, we're only willing to call you Your Highness out of respect. You're nothing more than a mortal right now, so why must you fight with us over this spiritual land? Since I'm a mortal and you're all heavenly officials, then what are you afraid of if I'm here to train? Xie Lian said. If I don't leave, are you going to chase me away forcibly? Of course that wasn't feasible. If a mortal did not commit any major sins, then heavenly officials were not allowed to use force against them lest they be punished. The heavenly officials really couldn't do anything to him. However, Xie Lian forgot one thing. Just as he stubbornly was facing those 30-something heavenly officials, a voice suddenly said, Your Highness has been banished to the mortal realm. Your backbone's grown much tighter. Your Highness has been banished to the mortal realm. Your backbone's grown much tougher. Not only would you rob mortals, you'd even offend heavenly officials. Hearing this, it was as if Xie Lian suddenly plunged into an ice cellar. He whipped his head up and saw the one who spoke was an insignificant lower-ranked official, but he wasn't one of the heavenly officials who had caught him red-handed at the robbery incident that day. As suspected, they'd already talked. It wasn't all in Xie Lian's head earlier. Everyone was looking at him with an inexplicable eye. Everyone knew. All of those heavenly officials, they all knew. In an instant, Xie Lian felt as if all his bones were pulled out. The flaming burning in his veins extinguished. His eyes red, filled with blood. He looked stiffly over to those junior officials and croaked, You said you wouldn't tell anyone. It is highly apparent why Hua Cheng targeted them. Oh my God. Chapter 186, 33 heavenly officials fight over auspicious land 2. Perhaps the surge of emotions in his eyes were too strong and too piercing. The junior officials being stared at by him quickly waved their hands. We didn't tell any outsiders. Then how did they know? None of the 30-some heavenly officials present appeared surprised when they heard this question. Since so many heavenly officials already knew, then how many officials in the upper court had already heard? Having been questioned by him, the heavenly officials were stumped for a bit before they argued. Well, it's not like they're outsiders. We're all close friends here. There aren't any secrets between us, so telling them isn't the same as telling everyone else. Other than to the heavenly officials here, we won't say anything. Xie Lian didn't wait for him to finish before he cried sharply, Lies! What a bunch of lies! I don't believe you! To have him interrupt so sharply, the junior officials were also starting to feel a little embarrassed, shrinking back into the crowd. Just then, one of the heavenly officials suddenly shouted, What does it matter if you believe them or not? It's already pretty good that no one exposed what good deeds your highness has done here in the mortal realm, and still you ask them to keep a secret for you? What duty do we have to keep a secret for you? What a joke! It was like a bucket of ice-cold water was thrown in Xie Lian's face, followed by a blade piercing his heart. He said quickly, No, But another one piped up. If you didn't do anything immoral, you wouldn't fear talk. You're the one who's corrupted. And you blame others for not keeping their word. If anyone was to keep such unjust affairs a secret for you, then that'd be the true crime. Well, no, Xie Lian cried. He wanted to say there was a reason that he hadn't wanted to. But he also knew very well in his heart that no matter how or what the reason was, it wasn't important. What mattered was he did indeed try to rob. A blemish like this was like a brand of shame marked on his face. And it was making him turn infinitely small before these heavenly officials, too afraid to even raise his voice in defending himself. Seeing that his will was diminished, one of the martial gods stepped out. Your Highness, now do you understand why we don't want you to cultivate here with us? Xie Lian lowered his head and clenched his fists. The martial god continued, we're not on the same path, and those not on the same path shall not cross. You best leave. Not all paths are bound! Oh my God. Hearing him say, those not on the same path shall not cross so presumptuously, Xie Lian suddenly understood. They could talk in circles, but at the end of the day, it was all just so he'd let go of the spiritual land. The knuckles of his fists were cracking and the lump in his throat pressed down for a while before Xie Lian said darkly, I'm not leaving. I will stay here and train. At this moment, his anger towards those 30-something heavenly officials had surpassed his embarrassment. Since things had progressed to this point, he might as well break all the broken jars and give it his all. Instead of running around with his tail between his legs, he'd rather thicken his face and stand his ground and force them to relent. Xie Lian whipped his head up and reiterated, I will stay here to train. This mountain isn't any of your domain. None of you have the right to ask me to leave. Seeing how he hardened his attitude, the 33 heavenly officials' faces all darkened. Xie Lian heard someone mutter, why must it be like this? I've never seen someone so thick-skinned. Still, they could say all they wanted, but Xie Lian would stand his ground. Even if his heart was now bleeding profusely, having been stabbed by spears of lips and swords of tongues, he would stubbornly remain without moving. I love that line. The martial god said, it seems your highness will force your way to bring displeasure to everyone? Xie Lian said coldly, come chase me out if you've got what it takes. Even if you all want to, you haven't the skills. The moment he said this, a number of heavenly officials instantly dropped their faces and pulled out their weapons. Of course they would. To martial gods, his words just now were a grave provocation. There were a number of them present who were martial gods. There was no way they could pretend they didn't hear. Having been surrounded, Xie Lian wasn't scared a bit. He had no blades in his hands and could only grip tightly onto the branch they used as a trekking pole. One of the martial gods said severely, Your Highness, if you apologize immediately, we could pretend you didn't just offend us. However, Xie Lian replied, if I brought any displeasure to any of you, I refuse to apologize. Gripping the tree branch, he pointed forward, because none of you are fit to be gods. Before him was a rage and a wave of outrage. Someone clicked his tongue. We're not fit, and someone like you who robbed mortals is worthy? Xie Lian couldn't hold back anymore. He didn't want to anymore. Sweeping that branch, he charged forward to attack, yelling, You bullies! Those martial gods readied their weapons and welcomed his attack. The heavenly official standing in the back cried, It's not like we forced you to go rob, so what reason do you have to begrudge us? However, they were too glad too early. At first, they thought without spiritual powers and without weapons, Xie Lian would be easy to take down. Yet unexpectedly, that wasn't the case at all. Even though it was only a branch in Xie Lian's hand, it swung like a vicious blade, forcing them back, exceedingly strong. Both sides didn't fight for very long before a number of the martial gods' swords went flying. Okay, well, now Hua Cheng facing them now. Doesn't seem like it was such a big deal. They were even scared of getting scratched by the sharp winds swept by the swinging branch, and each of them startled, and they fled to hide in the back. Esteemed heavenly officials couldn't even defeat a banished mortal. What an embarrassment. Just then, one of the heavenly officials, watching the fight, suddenly shrieked from the distance, What's this? With that cry, the other heavenly officials became alarmed too. What's going on? That heavenly official seemed to be in excruciating pain, covering his face and bent at the waist. A ball of ghost fire just hit my eyes right now. Is he playing tricks? Xie Lian recalled that this was the official that was pointing at him, shouting he was a robber, and he snorted, What ghost fire? If you want to rob me of my spiritual land, then just say so. There's no need to slander me any further. His fury flared again, and his attacks became more aggressive. The spears and blades of that circle of martial gods were all stricken away by this normal, perfectly sized branch, and the weapons clattered as they fell to the ground. Someone yelled, It's caught! It's caught! Look! Xie Lian paused and steadied himself and saw that the heavenly officials were in a riot. Something was in someone's hand, being raised high for all to see. There really is a ghost fire, and he's playing dirty. We've got proof. Xie Lian looked closely, and sure enough, it was a ball of hauntingly blazing little ghost fire. He cried angrily, I don't even know what's going on. How dare you accuse me of playing tricks just by catching some ghost fire? It's not like ghost fires are anything rare. Do you see my name carved on it? The heavenly official who shrieked held his eye. Why would normal ghost fires attack my eyes? If it was under your control, why would it act like this? I like that it's attacking their eyes, right? Xie Lian rebuked. And I can say it's some wandering spirit on the mountain that was scared by you lot and came crashing in a daze. What kind of proof is that? The first martial god who made a move went and grabbed the little ghost fire. Who cares whose control it's under? A harmful thing like this, just disperse it, he said as he gripped harder, looking like he was going to squeeze the spirit apart. Seeing this, Xie Lian blurted, let it go! In the end, he couldn't bear to have the wandering spirits dragged into this quarrel, and he went up to fight that martial god to retrieve the ghost fire. Since his intention was to take the spirit back, he held back a bit, and the two stood at a standstill. Suddenly, a few heavenly officials came from behind and called out, You here? Come quick, come see for yourself what's going on. It sounded as if someone had come. The heavenly officials all looked over and said, You're finally here! We've been waiting for you! Come give us a hand! Hearing this, Xie Lian was startled at first and thought, could this be someone powerful? Then he thought, well, who cares who it is? If they're just going to give me trouble, I'll just fight another round. I'm not afraid of anyone. His guts were filled with resentment right now, and he was prepared to enter a brawl. Yet unexpectedly, when the crowd had parted and the one who arrived fashionably late came forward, Xie Lian was thoroughly stunned. He never thought that the one who come would be Mu Qing. Oh my God. Mu Qing obviously hadn't expected that he'd bump into Xie Lian in such a situation. The moment their eyes met, they were both shocked. Xie Lian's eyes were wide and he completely forgot about the martial gods that had been fighting. He muttered, Why are you here? Aren't you... He noticed something after having said only a few words. Sorry about my dogs. And he instantly understood and shut up. What Mu Qing was wearing right now weren't the old worn black robes from when they were on the run, but rather the martial heavenly official attire of that of the lower court. In the past, when Feng Xin and Mu Qing were working as Xie Lian's left and right hands, their abilities were much admired and appreciated, catching the eyes of many. Later, when Xie Lian was banished, there were a number of heavenly officials who thought it was a shame that Feng Xin and Mu Qing were banished together. There were even some who'd come and ask in secret whether they'd be willing to transfer to other palaces and serve. It wasn't impossible for a heavenly official who, out of admiration, would pull Mu Qing up to the lower court to serve them. That must have been it. Moreover, he must have done well for himself, otherwise he wouldn't have been banding together with this group of heavenly officials to come search for auspicious lands to cultivate. Xie Lian was still in the body of a mortal, but Mu Qing had already returned to the lower court. To have a scenario like this, how ironic. When on the other side, Mu Qing finally steadied himself with great effort, and he asked in confusion, what is going on here? Those heavenly officials all fought to tell their tales. Xie Lian stood from afar, his body extremely stiff. He noticed that they didn't tell Mu Qing about his robbery. What did this mean? It meant Mu Qing had already heard about the incident. Mu Qing also knew that he went to rob. Drop after drop of cold sweat rolled down from the side of Xie Lian's face, and he involuntarily backed up a couple of steps. The martial god who had been facing him earlier huffed in anger. He wants to take the spiritual land all for himself and chase us out, Mu Qing. Hurry up and help. What help? Have Mu Qing help fight him? Xie Lian was going numb with rage, shocked to the core. He finally snapped back to himself and stammered furiously, You're all giving a false account, so shameless. It wasn't like that at all. I clearly wasn't. Mu Qing was only watching from the side, and Xie Lian was growing anxious with rage. He charged up at the branch again. The martial gods were having trouble defending, backing away in defeat, and they yelled again, Mu Qing, what are you doing just standing there? The other heavenly officials also joined in on yelling, but Mu Qing still looked hesitant, like he didn't know whether he should attack. Xie Lian heard them urge Mu Qing to surround himself, and his heart blazed with rage. Mu Qing isn't like you all. He's my friend. He would never help you. He raged and put more strength into his hand, sending another row of weapons flying. The rest of the heavenly officials saw that he was growing bolder the more he fought, and things weren't going down right, and they cried urgently, Mu Qing, are you just going to watch him mess us things up as he wills? Mu Qing's expression changed to something unreadable, and he took a step forward, his fingers twitching. The heavenly officials next to him prompted, well, don't just stand there. Give us a hand. It just had to be at this moment that someone remarked sarcastically, "It's understandable that Mu Qing doesn't want to move. He was His Highness's personal assistant after all. Even if His Highness was robbing mortals in spiritual land, he still has to consider the old affection of their past relations. It's already more than enough that he didn't join His Highness, so how can we possibly expect him to help us?" The words sounded like they were giving Mu Qing an out. Truly wicked. Immediately, the veins popped on Mu Qing's forehead. The air was growing delicate, and Xie Lian could tell things were going wrong. "Mu Qing." He only called out the name, but the next moment, his hands were light, followed by the sound of something being slashed. Xie Lian blinked and looked down. What was slashed was only his weapon, the tree branch. When he looked up, Mu Qing before him was already holding his arm bateau. Right at that moment, the tip of the blade was pointed at Xie Lian. The one controlling the saber said coldly, "Please leave." Xie Lian stared at Mu Qing with that broken branch in his hand. After a long while, he tried, "I hadn't really wanted to rob anyone. I wasn't going to take spiritual land either. I came here first. Please leave." Xie Lian gazed at him and hesitated for a moment. "You know I'm not lying, right?" When he asked this, he was a little more hopeful, but also a little scared. A voice was telling him, "Don't ask anymore. Just turn around and walk away," but he still couldn't help but ask. Before Mu Qing responded, Xie Lian's body slumped forward, and he fell heavily onto the ground. The ground was the muddy earth of the mountain path, filled with holes and ditches, covered in rocks and fallen leaves. Xie Lian lay sprawled out on the ground, bulging his eyes, still in a state of disbelief. One of the heavenly officials had shoved him while he was at a loss, and made him fall this embarrassingly in front of so many eyes. It really was too embarrassing. All around were voices high and low, filling the air, entering Xie Lian's ears. His eyes were extremely wide, and he looked before him at the blackened ground before slowly raising his head. He saw Mu Qing standing not too far away from him. Mu Qing was standing among the heavenly officials, not looking at him. Just like all the others, he had no intention of giving Xie Lian a hand to help pull him up. Thus, Xie Lian understood. No one was going to give him a hand to help pull him up. He laid there for a good while before he crawled himself up. Those heavenly officials thought he was about to start another bout and were exceedingly alarmed. But Xie Lian didn't seek to fight anyone anymore. His head was bowed low as he fumbled around, and after finding the little satchel the queen had packed for him, he picked it up silently, carried it on his back, and turned around and headed to descend the mountain step by step. As he walked, his steps grew faster and faster, and it didn't take long before Xie Lian started running madly. He held his breath and ran all the way down the mountain, not taking a moment to rest. He didn't know how far he'd run, and suddenly, without minding his own footing, he tripped and fell again, and that breath he was holding finally came out with a mouthful of angry blood. In his moment of panic, he hadn't thought to get up and only sat on the ground panting. Even when his breathing returned to normal, he didn't think to stand up and instead started spacing out right on the spot. Suddenly, a hand was extended to him. Xie Lian blinked slowly at it, and his eyes followed up the arm and looked. It was Mu Qing again. He was standing next to Xie Lian, his face slightly pale, with his hand reached out. A brief moment later, he said with a stiff, "Are you all right?" Xie Lian watched him with empty eyes and didn't speak. Perhaps it was because he was growing uncomfortable by this chilling gaze, and Mu Qing averted his eyes. His hand was still outstretched to get up. But his hand had reached out too late. Xie Lian didn't take his hand, and he didn't get up either. He only continued to stare at him with unblinking eyes. The two were to stand still for a long time, and Mu Qing's face was growing darker and darker. Just as he was about to take his hand back, Xie Lian suddenly grabbed a handful of mud and slung it at Mu Qing with a sound. "Pah!" Mu Qing had never expected he would do such a thing. He didn't know whether it could be called rude or juvenile. A ball of dirty mud splattered at his chest, splashing spots onto his face, and he was bewildered. A moment later, anger rolled up, but he forced it down. He said darkly, "I didn't have a choice." He indeed didn't have a choice. He was getting along well with those heavenly officials, and if he just stood and watched his colleagues get beaten by Xie Lian without helping, others would think he was on Xie Lian's side, and that would ruin his day. It was as if Xie Lian had forgot how to speak, and he only continued to hurl mud at him. Mu Qing blocked a couple of times, but he couldn't keep it up. He cried furiously, "Are you crazy? Didn't I just tell you I didn't have a choice? Didn't you go rob because you also didn't have a choice?" Scram, get out of here, leave. Those were the only words echoing Xie Lian's mind, but he couldn't utter a single sound. He could only crazily grab at anything at his disposal to throw. He didn't care who he was hurling at either. Finally, Mu Qing couldn't take it anymore, and he steeled his face as he swept his sleeves and left. Xie Lian panted harshly for a bit and fell back down, spacing out again. He sat in that position until nightfall. After the skies turned dark, a number of phosphorescent flames came floating, dancing hauntingly about. It was as if Xie Lian didn't see them and didn't bother to muster any strength. However, those phosphorescent flames seemed to be upset that they weren't noticed, and more gathered by his side. Xie Lian still ignored them, until the figure of a person appeared from within the phosphorescent flames. The arrival of that person seemed to always be accompanied by an immense, ominous foreboding. Xie Lian sensed something and slowly lifted his head. About 10 feet away, the silhouette of a white-clothed man was standing amidst the countless floating phosphorescent flames, and the half of the mask on his face was smiling hauntingly. He greeted pleasantly, "How are you, Your Highness?" Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! Oh my God! Oh no. All right. This volume's gonna make me cry. It's gonna make me cry. And I was close twice this reading, and I had to pull it together and be like, no, Romania, don't you dare cry yet. Because we're not even halfway, we're halfway done now, but that's it. This is so hard to read because I was like, Xie Lian just, it's like every chapter is, can it get any worse? Why, yes, it can. Oh my God, MXTX is not pulling any punches. MXTX is like, oh, you want it to get sad? Okay, we're about to get sad. And you know what? I think this is sadder than Modao Zushi. I do. And do you know why I think that? Because Xie Lian's by himself. And, well, not really by himself, but hear me out. In Modao Zushi, if you've not read that story, then this is some light spoilers. I'll keep it brief. But in Modao Zushi, there is a period where Bai Wuxiang is by himself, and it's very, very sad. But it seems like at all times there is someone inadvertently with him. It's just whether he pushes them away or not. Whether it's Lan Wangji, whether it's Wen Ning, whether it's Wen Qing, whether it's Zhang Cheng. At some point, I mean, yeah, he does push them away, and we understand. And we kind of get a little frustrated with Bai Wuxiang in Modao Zushi, or at least I did, because you get why he does it, but you're just like, oh, come on now, don't do that. Like why are you doing it? And when he's the Yiling patriarch, there is kind of like a sinisterness to him, and you're like, oh, don't do that. Like, why are you doing this? And like one of those scenarios. With Xie Lian, things just keep going bad to worse, to worse, to worse. And there's nobody, he doesn't feel like he can turn to anyone. Everybody's abandoning him. He can't turn to his family because they're relying on him. Mu Qing abandoned him. Oh, we'll talk about Mu Qing in this chapter set. We'll talk about him for sure. But it's storming outside. It started storming, so it feels very fitting. And that's why my dogs will probably be barking. But like Feng Xin, I feel for Feng Xin in this, and we'll talk about him. I feel for him. I feel for Xie Lian, obviously. I wanted to cry for him, like, immensely. I feel for Hua Cheng as the little ghost fire trying to the fact that Hua Cheng tried to console Xie Lian and physically couldn't, it explains so much of why Hua Cheng is so obsessed with not only protecting Xie Lian, but keeping him safe. And like, God, the idea when he was the little ghost fire flittering around him and he couldn't warm him up, I'm like, that's why Hua Cheng wants to like be around him and hug him and be all next to him. He's like, I'll keep you warm, Xie Lian. Like, he wants to do that now. And I'm like, please, Hua Cheng, do it. And Xie Lian let him. And then him protecting him and trying to help, like, as a little ghost fire. And then Mu Qing and the 33 heavenly officials. We'll talk about them in a second. And then Bai Wuxiang showing up right when things get worse. You know who Bai Wuxiang is like? He is like not only like Ursula, I feel, from Little Mermaid, he's like Flotsam and Jetsam and Ursula combined. Like, he just shows up. I'm picturing it in the next chapter set. He's like, poor Xie Lian, no one cares for you, but I care for you. Like, I just feel it coming, right? I just feel it coming that oh my God, Bai Wuxiang's gonna be like Flotsam and Jetsam and Ursula combined. Poor unfortunate soul with no one else to turn to. I'm just predicting it! And that's the only thing making me excited about the next chapter set is Bai Wuxiang being there and being like, oh, but Xie Lian, I can help you. A deal with the devil, right? Oh my God, we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it. I just get those like Ursula and Flotsam and Jetsam combined into Bai Wuxiang. Oh my God. I was like, there he is. He's shown up right when Xie Lian's at his worst. Oh my God. So yeah, lots of things happened. These chapters were incredibly sad. Xie Lian is at his lowest point ever. Like his lowest point. There's no question. And the thing about it is, oh, by the way, none of these were answered. I have so many unresolved plot points, but none of them are getting answered in this volume. It's just like, we still got volume 7 and 8. Don't worry, maybe we'll resolve them. I'm just like, I mean, we are getting Hua Cheng's origins. I guess we can eventually, at the end of this volume, probably knock that out. We are getting those slowly but surely. But we don't know any of these others yet. These are just like Wu Yong things. Bai Wuxiang's death with Jun Wu. We don't know anything about that. Who's the prince? Don't know. We'll maybe find out things as we go. But yeah, oh my God. I've got volume 1 sitting here if you're wondering what that is. We're going to go back to volume 1. I pulled volume 1 up after the reaction. I was like, we're going to go back and touch base on that little story there because it's all connecting back to volume 6. Can you believe it? Everybody's been like, oh yeah, Hua Cheng and the 33 gods that he defeated. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. And it should have been something that you knew was going to eventually circle back around, but I wasn't expecting it at all. And then here we are, and it's all circling back around, which makes me believe that everyone that has wronged Xie Lian in the past, Hua Cheng has made a list, and he's like, they're going to pay for wronging Gege. And like Qi Rong was at the top. And Bai Wuxiang is interesting though. Bai Wuxiang is interesting because I feel like, Qi Rong and the 33 heavenly officials, they're nothing for Hua Cheng to face. Bai Wuxiang gives him a run for his money. And like, again, talking about Modao Zushi, I never felt in Modao Zushi like Yao was a threat. I felt like he was an obstacle that they had to get past to save the day and have the story conclude. And I felt like Zhu Yang was a threat, but was an obstacle as well. I never felt in Modao Zushi. For me, in Modao Zushi, it was always, will these two get to be horny together happily ever after? Like, happily horny ever after. Will these two get to love each other? Can we just get to that? Like, I felt like Modao Zushi is all about solving a mystery and also hoping that these two horny adults are going to get to do their thing. And that's pretty much the story. And it's really good. I love Modao Zushi. But I never felt like there was a aggressive threat that was going to like claim Wei Wuxian or Lan Wangji's lives and make them not exist. I just never felt like that. I felt like there were threats of maybe keeping them apart, but not like killing them. Bai Wuxiang is a very threatening character. And Bai Wuxiang, back in the caves, when he was literally giving Hua Cheng a run for his money, I was like, ooh, you can threaten Hua Cheng. That's not good. I was like, no, I'm legit scared of you. And so, yeah, Bai Wuxiang's just such an imposing character and very threatening, very confident, just laissez-faire, like just shows up. Hi, hey, Xie Lian, are you like having problems? Do you have like no friends? I'll be your friends. Let's just fuck things up. That's literally it. And Xie Lian's at his lowest point now, so I'm very curious. Xie Lian knows who Bai Wuxiang is. He remembers him from the fall of Shanla. So I'm like, how is this gonna go? Why is Bai Wuxiang showing up now? I'm like, obviously, I feel like Bai Wuxiang is attracted as a ghost to large sources of power. And so it kind of makes sense why he showed up at the mountain. If there's all these heavenly, like all this spiritual energy, Bai Wuxiang's like, ooh, I want to come and see what this is. But I have another theory about that. We're going to talk about it at the end of the chapter set. We're going to talk about that theory that I've got about Bai Wuxiang that makes things a little bit more complicated. But What I'm not surprised about is the fact that Xie Lian failed at robbery. And I'm honestly glad that he did. I'm glad that Xie Lian did not actually rob anybody, right? I'm glad Xie Lian did not rob anybody. So I guess we should put over here, we're going to talk about this whole chapter could basically be summed up as Xie Lian's very no good, rotten, not good time at all day. That he just goes through the ringer and is at his lowest point. And I think that it should be noted that when we start out this chapter, here is where Xie Lian's state of mind is. He has a really bad state of mind. It's not going great. And so at the very beginning, he's worried about his parents. He is terrified that they are going to get killed or that they're going to die because his dad's not in good health. His mom and them keep moving around. They're still, the people of Yong'an are still trying to find them and kill them. So he's very worried about his parents. That's a problem. Mu Qing has left, which he feels betrayed by. He feels like his best friend, one of his best friends has left. And he's like, well, it's my fault that he left. So I must be doing things wrong. And I'm a terrible person because now my friends abandoned me. He's worried about Feng Xin and keeping him around. He wants Feng Xin to stay reliable and with him. But it's like treading on eggshells. He's like, I've already ran off one friend. If I don't act right, I'm going to run off another friend. And I need Feng Xin to stay because I can't do this all myself. I don't know what to do. We don't have money. They're out of money. They're out of money. They can't, oh, what's the phrase I'm looking for? They can't trade or scrap anything. What am I, like thrift? I guess they can't do anything like that. They've sold and did all that with all the things that they own. And on top of it all, Xie Lian is depressed. And that kind of adds like a whole nother layer to it, is that, you know, Xie Lian's always been in such good spirits and he's always been like, oh, we can do it, and so hopeful. And now he's like running to the end of his rope and he's like, I don't know what else to do. And he's honestly getting depressed. And it makes much more sense now why Hua Cheng gets so angry whenever Xie Lian's like, well, in the past, I mean, I've suffered through everything. What else can they do to me? And Hua Cheng gets so obsessively angry about it, and it makes sense now. Hua Cheng has been following Xie Lian around as a little ghost fire, and he's seen everything bad that's happened to Xie Lian, and he's seen just how horrible things have gotten, and he wasn't able to do anything. That's the thing. We'll talk about it as we get to those chapters. But Hua Cheng wasn't able to help him, and he's seen him at his worst, right? So we're going to put Hua Cheng up here. We're going to put Hua Cheng up here and just touch base on him. But yeah, and then we'll talk about, get one for Mu Qing to bring up here. I'm trying to be nice to Mu Qing. I am, but man. Like, here we go. Okay. Toss this here. So yeah. So Xie Lian decides he's going to rob people. And like I said in the reaction, I kept thinking back to Bungo Stray Dogs. The very first episode of Bungo Stray Dogs, the main character at sushi, he's hungry and he's like, I gotta rob somebody to get some money. But everything that goes by, like at first there's like an army that goes by, he's like, oh no, there's too many. Then there's somebody that speeds by on a motorcycle, he's like, I can't catch them. And then it's like none of the possibilities work, and he's just, what it is it's a reflection on Atsushi's character, that he's just a nice person who really doesn't have it in him to rob someone. And Xie Lian is the same way. Bless him, but even though he tries, he doesn't want to rob anyone. And he tries at first to justify it. He's like, oh, well, it's just like being Robin Hood. We're just going to rob for the rich to feed the poor. He's like, well, we're the poor, so we just have to do it to help ourselves. But he admits that he never really believed in that mentality. He was always kind of like, no, it's still robbery. No matter how you do it, it's still that. So it's not right. You should not do it. And Xie Lian acknowledges, he's like, if I wanted to, I could rob very easily. And that's the sad thing, is that, yeah, if Xie Lian wanted to, he could have easily robbed any of those individuals without a problem. But his character prevented him from doing that. And like, he had the old man come by, he couldn't rob. The little kid that got the advice for his family, he couldn't rob. Everybody he saw, he made up an excuse of why he couldn't rob from them, until he finally was like, I can't go back with nothing. He's like, I can't go back with nothing. My family's dying. Feng Xin is working for me and I'm not doing anything to show for it. So he's like, I need to bring back something. So he finally settles on this middle-aged guy. And he was there for like 6 or 7 hours waiting on him. And so finally, after half a day, he finds this middle-aged man. And he notes that the man's appearance was kind of savage and greasy. It was kind of obnoxious. And he says, I could tell he wasn't anyone good with just a glance. But then Xie Lian said, you can't judge a book by its cover, because he looks greasy and disheveled. Like the soldiers complain that, or think that he looks like a drunkard, right? But he's like, I can't be bothered. It'll have to do. And then he tries to rob him, and it fails miserably. He doesn't have the conviction to go through with it. He chases him to the trees, and then he runs into the group of 30 so heavenly officials. Or it's not really a group of heavenly officials, it's 30 or so. It's just a group of people. It doesn't say in this initial group how many it is. We know later on that there's like 30 something, 33, right? 34 if you count Mu Qing, that were the familiar faces from the upper and lower court. But they're all heavenly officials, and Xie Lian's like, oh my God. And I get now why Xie Lian, he didn't make friends with any of the heavenly officials before, and now we know why he didn't after the fact. He didn't want to talk to anybody because he was so ashamed of this moment. He was so ashamed that they caught him trying to rob, and he felt shame and embarrassment. Because they went back and told everybody in the heavenly court. You know that Junwu found out. I do think it says something for Junwu. I will say, it says something for Junwu that Junwu doesn't seem to hold it against Xie Lian. He calls him a problem child, which is what it is. But he doesn't seem to hold it against him. It seems like in the present time, Junwu accepts Xie Lian for who he is, which is nice. I like that Junwu doesn't tease him, doesn't hold it against him. Ling Wen doesn't seem to hold it against him, but as we know from Ling Wen, now again, Ling Wen wasn't around when all this was going down, but I'm sure that they heard about it. But Ling Wen has their own sins with the brocade immortal, so they were probably like, no, you tried to rob somebody, I killed a guy and turned him into this cursed item. We're fine. So I feel like Ling Wen forgives Xie Lian and is understanding, and I feel like Pei Ming's kind of the same way, because Pei Ming's like, well, my hands are dirty too, even if they've heard this stuff about Xie Lian. But I almost wonder if Junwu kind of swept a lot of this under the rug, especially after the 33 heavenly officials were defeated. If Junwu kind of just swept the whole Xie Lian thing under the rug and was like, we're not going to talk about this. We're not going to talk about the rumors about him. And Xie Lian just became, instead of specifically a faked robber, he just basically had a bad reputation as being unlucky. Maybe it was watered down over the years. I don't know. But in any case, Xie Lian is horrified that he's discovered by these heavenly officials, and is just like, he can't respond. They're like, oh, you, and I wanted to cry for Xie Lian. It's just one of those, you don't know whether to laugh or to cry. Well, now I know what that feels like, because that's how I felt this entire chapter said. I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry, and how sad this all was. Because just to see Xie Lian's, every time we've seen him in the present, he's been so shameless. Like, it's not bothered him. He's built up this wall, right? Present Xie Lian has this like wall of thick skin where nothing seems to bother him. The reason for that is because everything that under the sun that could have happened to him seems to have happened to him. And at this point he's like, well, it can't get any worse, so I might as well just deal with it. And Hua Cheng hates that. And so it's so weird and heartbreaking to read Xie Lian in these chapters be so embarrassed, and Xie Lian not know what to say, and just feel like, and the condescension, like the heavenly officials are like, oh, don't worry, Your Highness, we understand. It is mind-boggling to me that these heavenly officials who knew Xie Lian was the Prince of Shanla, like one of the most decorated heavenly officials at the time, is now in these rags attempting to rob a mortal, and they're just like, oh, well, oh, it's okay, Your Highness, we're not going to say anything. Like the condescension, right? It's like if a member of a country club was suddenly kicked out and they saw him like at the grocery store and they're like, oh, hi, how's it going? Like just that kind of attitude. it's so heartbreaking because Xie Lian's just like, you know, he was this decorated prince and now he's this bum out in the middle of the desolate mountains, and the heavenly officials are like, wow, how far you've fallen. Like, oh man, it's just heartbreaking. And Xie Lian just, he just can't deal with it. And so he like runs away filled with all these regrets. And he's like, even if he didn't rob anybody, it's the fact that he tried to, that it's just as bad in his mind. And then the little ghost fire. Now, for a split second, when he's around the heavenly officials, he looks up and swears. It says that he could have swore in his peripheral he saw a blurry white silhouette up ahead, and he said, who goes there? And then it instantly disappeared, like in a wisp of smoke, which is what Bai Wuxiang did in the mountain. It disappeared like that, like it was just smoke and flame. And then he said he seemed to have seen a mask. Now, I will find Bai Wuxiang. We might as well put Bai Wuxiang up here. I'm wondering if Bai Wuxiang is just attracted to multitudes of spiritual energy, right? Now, at this point, Bai Wuxiang is still in full force. Junwu has not killed him yet that we know of, because Xie Lian recognizes him at the end. Because after Shanla fell, Bai Wuxiang kind of disappeared, right? So we've not gotten to the matchup yet between Junwu and Bai Wuxiang. I'm sure it's coming, maybe in this volume, but we've not got there yet. So as far as we know, Bai Wuxiang's still at full force, full power, right? It's interesting though. I feel like Bai Wuxiang's attracted to large vats of spiritual energy, like it's a beacon. He's like, oh, there's a lot of energy. I'm going to go over here and see what chaos I can cause. And then he just happens to run to Xie Lian because Xie Lian just somehow finds his way into those situations. But it would make sense because, like, Baisi Hill, there was the battle going on. Yang Ling was there, who had the aura of the king, along with Xie Lian and the heavenly officials, Mu Qing and Feng Xin. Makes sense that Bai Wuxiang would kind of be attracted to all the spiritual energy going around, being like, what's this? And the curse was there, even if he started it. So, it seems like he's attracted to that kind of, like, is like a moth to a flame, right? So he shows up that one time around where all the heavenly officials are, which is interesting to me. And then he shows up again when the heavenly officials are around again. So I think he was just attracted to that power and just wanted to go see what was up. And so then he goes back, before he meets Hua Cheng again at the graveyard, he goes back and Feng Xin's like, where you been all this time? And Xie Lian's just like, nowhere, it's fine, it's nothing. I just tried to figure something out and it didn't work. And Xie Lian's like, I'm not going out anymore. And now we know why. Xie Lian's like, I can't go busk anymore because what if I go into town and they notice me? What if and the thing about it is, if he went into town, would they have noticed him? Probably not. It's one man. It was one middle-aged man that saw him. So would they have probably noticed him? Probably not. But Xie Lian's guilt and paranoia makes him think that if he goes there, what if he's outed by the police there? What if the man recognizes him? And he just builds up all this negativity in his mind, and he's like, I can't risk it. And so Feng Xin's like, oh, well, and the thing about it is, Feng Xin says, I'll go myself. You just focus on training. And obviously, we know by now, Feng Xin's been seeing Zhan Lan in his spare time. So he's probably like, well, you just rest. I'll go in town and run errands. And while he's running errands, he sees Zhan Lan and is having an affair with her. Which is not really an affair. He's seeing her. He just isn't telling Xie Lian about it. And it makes sense why Feng Xin doesn't want to tell Xie Lian, because I totally forgive Feng Xin for not wanting to tell him, because it's like, well, do I tell my best friend that I'm hanging out with this girl while I'm getting medicine for your folks? But then, you know, you can't be mad at Feng Xin because he is still getting the medicine. He is still getting the money to feed them. He is still doing his job. He's just also trying to have a life for himself on the side. And you can't quite blame him for that. I think I have more forgiveness for Feng Xin than Mu Qing at this point, because Feng Xin isn't abandoning Xie Lian. He's just adding things on top of what he's doing. And he's still coming back and helping Xie Lian. He's just also helping himself. So, whereas Mu Qing is helping himself, but he's not helping Xie Lian. So, I feel a little bit more forgiving of Feng Xin at this point. Now, that may change later on in this book. But for right now, I forgive him because I'm like, no, that makes sense. You're just trying to do your thing, but he's also accomplishing. He's not like neglecting in his duties to Xie Lian. So, I think it's fine. And then he tells him he needs to focus on training. And Xie Lian's just like, I don't even want to cultivate anymore. That's the thing. At that point, Xie Lian, he's so embarrassed, he does not want to ascend. And you kind of get why he doesn't. He's like, if I ascend and go back up there, I'm going to be the laughing stock of the heavenly realm, which he ends up being anyway. But he's like, I can't go back up there and see them. He's like, what will Feng Xin say? He's like, I can't be fake and go up there and do that. That's awful. And plus, I don't think Xie Lian wants to ascend right now because he's going to leave his parents again. He's like, I know my parents are in danger. If I ascend again, they're not going to be helped. They'll die. And Feng Xin wants him to ascend so that Feng Xin can get out of this situation. But it's just Xie Lian feels like it's all for naught. He's like, I've got to stick around and help my family. I don't want to go up and be a laughingstock, so I can't ascend right now. I have no interest in it at this point. But he can't tell Feng Xin that because then Feng Xin will abandon him. Feng Xin is under the assumption that Xie Lian is going to keep training so he can ascend again so Feng Xin can go with him. He's just like, this is a temporary situation. We're just going to patch things up and then we're going to get out of here, right, Your Highness? And at this point, Xie Lian's given up on that. He's like, I just need to make do until my parents and I can be settled. But it's becoming more and more apparent that's not going to happen. So what then? And I do feel for Feng Xin a little bit, and I think that it is wrong for Xie Lian to not voice these concerns with Feng Xin. I think that it's sad that there's not that communication. Feng Xin isn't telling Xie Lian about Zhanlan and about, his growing concerns. Xie Lian's not telling Feng Xin about his depression and his spiraling. And so they just kind of both stay in this state of ignorance about each other, and then it just ends up getting worse. Because, yeah, I do think it's wrong for Xie Lian to use Feng Xin without telling him he's not going to cultivate anymore. But at the same time, I get why he's doing it. He's like, I can't abandon my parents. So it's just a bad situation. It's just really, really bad. And so he decides to go off, and the night is so cold. And he ends up, I can just picture it, him ending up at this cold graveyard. And Xie Lian has a habit of going to graveyards. He went to a graveyard back in volume 2 that was his mom's mausoleum. And now he's at this graveyard. And I can't lie when I couldn't help but think of Emperor's Smile from Modazushi when I saw Xie Lian grab the bottle of wine. But the problem is, in Modazushi, the bottle of wine is like this celebratory thing between Bai Wuxiang and Lan Wangji, and it has all this symbolism, and it's about them coming together, and it has all this meaning. And here it's Xie Lian at his worst. And man, here's the thing. I get terrible hangovers. I haven't had a drink since June because I got really sick over the summer and was like, I'm going to stop drinking because it doesn't seem to be doing my body very good. I've had maybe 2 glasses of wine since then. Not regretting these decisions. But the thing of it is I get really bad hangovers. And the moment he starts chugging that wine, having ate practically nothing but like a cold bun, which we'll talk about in a second, I was like, oh, Xie Lian, that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. Drinking a whole bottle of wine with nothing on your stomach and you've never drank before in your life, you are going to be miserable. And he is. But also the steamed bun, the fact that Xie Lian is like, well, if you claim that you're hungry, but you're not willing to eat a cold bun, are you really hungry? That's horrible. And it makes sense now why Xie Lian suffered by eating just like the bare bones and the worst things imaginable. Because he's like, well, when you're hungry, you'll eat anything. It's like, it's not fun. It's not a great time. But anyway, so then as he's drinking, I love that Hua Cheng shows up as the little ghost fire. So Hua Cheng shows up as the ghost fire. He shows up as the ghost fire around Xie Lian, and he's anxious with Xie Lian drinking. It almost reads, when I read it in the English translation, it read like Hua Cheng was like, oh, no, Your Highness, you're not supposed to drink. This isn't good. It's like Hua Cheng was watching out for him. And when he was like going in and out of his body and through his body, but he couldn't touch him, I was like, oh my God. Like I have never wanted to root more for us to get back to the present and for Hua Cheng to I want Hua Cheng to just like put his hands all over Xie Lian's body. I want this to happen because I'm like, no, the fact that Hua Cheng loves Xie Lian and worships him, but he can't help him is horrific. It's so sad. And Xie Lian at this point is just like, oh, little ghost fire. He's like, what are you doing? He thinks it's the ghost fire that is the man on the gravestone. He's like, I'll get out of here. But he just falls over, right? He just falls over. Is this your grave? Sorry, I'm drinking on it. And then he falls into the pit because he was so drunk. And it's the first time Xie Lian curses. And then he just kind of lets it out. Which you know what? As sad as it is that Xie Lian's at the state where he's cursing and like at his lowest point, I'm glad Xie Lian gets it out of his system. I feel like Xie Lian should have got it out of his system earlier, but he waits till the last minute till he's like pushed to the edge. And he's like, is there anyone who can help me out? Of course there wasn't anyone. Only a small ball of little ghost fire blazing unceasingly. And then after he fell, the ghost fire came rushing over, wanting to grab him but could never make contact. That's the thing. Hua Cheng was the only one that was there for him. He was the only one trying to help Xie Lian out of his pit of despair. Him in the grave is the biggest metaphor for Xie Lian's hit rock bottom at this point, which I don't know. I say Xie Lian's hit rock bottom, but we're not through this volume. Can it get worse? Probably. Do I want it to get worse? Hell no. I can't. I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it. But it's just like Xie Lian in the grave saying, will anyone help me? And no one comes to help him is like the biggest metaphor for his state of being at this point. He believes that no one out there is willing to help him and that he's all alone. Meanwhile, Hua Cheng is this little ghost fire that's like, I wish I could help you, but I can't. And so what's interesting here is that he's like, someone might as well just come and bury me. And Xie Lian's just like, I just might as well die. Xie Lian is giving off a lot of like depressing mood swings, and that line there, someone might as well just come bury me, is a little bit of suicidal ideation. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. But he's just kind of getting to the end of his rope, right? And he talks about how it's so cold. And then he said it was so tiny that like no one could overhear, but the ghost fire heard. And the idea of Hua Cheng as the little flame trying to like get up next to him and burning as bright as he can. The idea of the ghost fire is burning as bright as he can to try to warm him up, but ghost fire is cold, so it doesn't work. It was like, it's the saddest thing in the world. And the only thing that makes it where it's not sad is that we know in the present time, Hua Cheng is not like this. Hua Cheng is able to help Xie Lian. But then you get reminded that Hua Cheng's not in the kiln supposedly with Xie Lian. It's just him and Bai Wuxiang. And then you feel bad all over again. You're like, well, son of a bitch. But yes, Xie Lian hears this little feeble voice. I wondered why the ghost fire couldn't speak louder like he did last time. Because last time it seemed like he was speaking really boisterous. He's like, I'm here, Xie Lian. I'm going to help you and everything. And now the voice, it seemed so close yet so far, like it was a dream, but not. And it cried in despair. God, please wait for me. Just wait for me. Please give me a little more time. Let me. Now, is this Xie Lian being drunk and he can't hear Hua Cheng very well? And so that's the problem. Is that it? Or is it the fact that maybe Hua Cheng is... My thing is, he's a little ghost fire, right? He's a little ghost fire. Can he be at two places at once, right? The thing of it is, can a little ghost fire split into two and be at two places at once? So could it be that Hua Cheng is trying to go to Mount Tonglu right now? Could that be it? Could Hua Cheng be going to Mount Tonglu as we speak in these chapters, and he's trying to hurry and get there so he can go through the process of becoming a supreme so he can rescue Xie Lian? And he's just telling Xie Lian to please wait for me. Just wait for me. Give me a little more time. I'm almost there. Let me protect you. And he's just not there yet, right? And Xie Lian, of course, is in such a state of despair that he's just like, I'm not a god. I'm not anything. Whatever. And so then he blacks out. And, I mean, the question is, did he get more drunk? There was another bottle of wine there. Did he get more drunk? Did he finally crawl himself out of the pit? Or what ends up happening? Was he possessed? Because Feng Xin says he was running through the alleyway threatening soldiers. So was he drunk? Or was there something else going on for 2 days? I don't know. Did Hua Cheng possess him? I don't think Hua Cheng possessed him because I don't think Hua Cheng would ever do that to Xie Lian. He's not about that life. But the question is, was Xie Lian did he just get more drunk? Did he black out and then act drunkenly? Did Bai Wuxiang possess him? I don't know. But what ended up happening? In any case, Feng Xin finds him. And he's just like really scared for Xie Lian's sake. And he's like, did you drink? You look like you've been drinking. And Xie Lian's like, I did drink a bit. What of it? Like, he's just so despairing and distraught, right? And Feng Xin's like, well, how could you drink? Like, well, how much did you drink to be drunk for 2 days? And he's like, well, there were 2 jars of wine there. So he says, I didn't drink much, just a bit. Why can't I drink? And then Feng Xin, of course, is like, well, you can't drink because you need to ascend again. And that's not part of the rules. You can't cultivate if you're drunk. And Xie Lian's just like, he can't tell Feng Xin that he doesn't want to ascend anymore. He's at this pit. So instead, he's just like, ugh, what do I do? And I feel bad for Feng Xin in this moment because Xie Lian isn't opening up to him about all of his problems. And he really should have communicated to Feng Xin, but I understand why Xie Lian didn't, and that he was afraid Feng Xin would leave him, and then he'd be in even more despair. So it's just this very bad cycle right now. And again, like I said in the last several chapters, I don't dislike Mu Qing for leaving Xie Lian necessarily, because I get why Mu Qing was like, I can't take it anymore. I just can't. I get why Mu Qing left, but when we get to the mountain, we'll talk about that scene. But I get why he left. I get why Mu Qing was like, I just literally cannot, Your Highness. I gotta do right by me. I understand that. I totally get that. That makes sense. Because Xie Lian is just like grasping onto them. And Xie Lian is using Feng Xin. He is. Feng Xin's just so far reaping the benefits because he can go see Zhan Lan. So he's okay with it, right? But we'll see how that holds out. And then he tells his family that he's like, I think I just need to go. I need to go off by myself. Because he tries to like tell Feng Xin not to go busk again, because we find out Feng Xin's been getting hurt. He's been getting beaten up. He got slashed in the face and his arm got hurt by those guys while he was busking. And Xie Lian feels even more guilty. That he's like, well, now I'm causing my friend to get hurt. So he's like, you know what? I'll go to the mountains. I'll cultivate. I found this auspicious piece of land. I'll cultivate there and get strong again, and we'll be fine. And it's really sad because there is a lot of pressure on Xie Lian too, right? There's pressure from his family and Feng Xin to ascend again. Which is interesting because if he ascends, it's like, well, is he actually going to be able to help them? Because I thought the Goshi said, like, once you ascend, you can't help your family again. So, but they want him to ascend to help himself, right? They want him to be saved. I'm sure his family are like, don't worry about us. You do what you need to do so that you can get out. And so Xie Lian has this overwhelming pressure by Feng Xin and his mom to ascend, but at the same time, he wants to help them, but he can't do everything. So it's just, Xie Lian's in this really horrible position. And so for the next 10 days, he tries to cultivate, and it doesn't work. And he does it for like 2 months. He tries his best, and it's not working. And he's like, and meanwhile, because he's trying to cultivate, but because he's depressed, he's not thinking about anything else. He's just in this pit of despair. Xie Lian's mind is not focused on anything outside of cultivation and trying to do something that he's failing at. So he doesn't see that Feng Xin is having a developed relationship with Zhan Lan that we all know is going on behind the scenes. He doesn't see that. And it makes so much more sense now, because at the time, back last volume when Feng Xin, it got revealed that he was in a relationship, I'm like, Xie Lian, how'd you not notice? Like, how'd you not notice he was like going and seeing this girl? Now we know how it was happening, because Xie Lian was in a pit of depression and wasn't really focused on anybody else. So it's really, really sad. Right? It's really horribly sad. So then he's like, I'm just going to go to the mountains. And his dad tries to tell him he doesn't need anybody to look after him. And Xie Lian's like, you're just acting tough. But he knows it's not the case. And so he says he's going to go to the mountains. He's like, there's good feng shui here. I got my little satchel mom made for me. Got my bento box. I'm going to go here and train in the mountains. It's all going to work out great. I'll return very soon. famous last words. Because he gets to the mountain, he climbs up the steep and perilous mountain, hikes for 8 hours, does all this shit, gets to the top, and what happens? He runs into 33 heavenly officials. And some of them are the ones that have seen him be a part-time would-be robber. And yep, they're like, oh, your Royal Highness is here too. I was like, are you crazy? And Xie Lian's like, I really don't like cultivating with others, because he says he likes doing it by himself. And we find out why. And the reason why is because whenever you share space with somebody, all the energy has to get divided up. And the question is, how is it going to get divided up? And Xie Lian, he's already so strong to begin with that he naturally absorbs more energy than the others. So it makes sense why Xie Lian's been training by himself. He's like, it's kind of like the prodigy thing. He's like, well, I know I'm really good at the group work and these group projects, so I'm just going to do it all by myself and then give it to you guys later so you don't have to worry about it, right? Xie Lian's like, if I just cultivate by myself, I can get all the energy myself. I don't have to worry about sharing it. I don't have to worry about people getting upset when they don't get as much as me. But now he doesn't have a choice but to cultivate with these 33 others, so he's like, well, I can't go back empty-handed again. He's like, I'm actually trying to do something honest this time. I'm not trying to rob. I'm trying to literally do what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm not leaving. And this group of guys are such bullies. They are the worst. The worst. They're the worst. Because they could have just accepted the fact that Xie Lian was going to train with them. And they say that he's claimed many auspicious lands before, which, yeah, Xie Lian probably has, but like they would do the same if it were them. So whatever. It's like he showed up the same time they did. So why can't they share it? But they're like, yeah, why don't you let us have this one? And he's like, no, I was here first. I didn't ask you to leave, so why do you ask me to leave? And it's heartbreaking. They just didn't want to share the spiritual energy because they knew that he was going to take the most of it. And then here's the deal. He told those guys not to tell anybody about what had happened when he tried to rob that man. And they said they wouldn't say a word. And what did they do? They went back to the heavenly court, like we've established this entire story, that it's just a big old gossip mill, and they told everyone. He said you wouldn't. I love that Xie Lian just being like, you said you wouldn't tell anyone. And it's like, Xie Lian learning the hard way just how awful the heavenly officials are. And that's the thing about the ghost, realm. I feel like in the ghost city, like nobody has any pretenses. They're like, we're going to tell everybody. We're not going to, like, there's no lying. They're just going to tell people because they're ghosts. But here, Xie Lian was counting on them to uphold their word, and they did not. And so, before we dive into this, chapter 186, the final chapter, I want to bring out volume 1 again. Because as soon as this happened, I was like, hold up. We need to go back. And on page 156 and 157, the red-clad ghost chapter, I went back to find out about Hua Cheng's name. I still think it's hilarious that all of the versions of the story of how Hua Cheng came to be, again, we're learning the origins now, but the idea that maybe he was born without a right eye and was bullied and humiliated for it since birth. We don't know about the right eye part, but he was humiliated and bullied since birth. That he was filled with hatred for the world. Yes, until he met Xie Lian. That he was a young soldier who died in battle for his country and later came to walk the earth in resentment. Well, he did die in battle for his country, but I don't know if he walked the world in resentment. He was chasing after Xie Lian. And some say he was a fool who was tormented by the death of his love. Some even say he was a monster. Now, death of his love, does it mean that when Xie Lian fell from being ascended? Maybe, perhaps. But anyway, I want to read on page 157 about the story about the 33. Because now it's all the more interesting, right? So, let me see here. There were also many reasons for the gods to fear Hua Cheng. For example, his behavior was unpredictable. Sometimes he would carry out a massacre in cold blood, and sometimes he would do odd acts of kindness, which seems on track. He also wielded a great deal of influence in the mortal realm and had legions of followers. That's right, mortals worship gods to ask for blessing and protection so they could escape the evils from the ghost realm, and that was how the gods came to gain so many following. and followers. Yet Hua Cheng, a ghost, had such a large following on Earth, he could influence the world single-handedly. Here is the story that must be told. When Hua Cheng first appeared, he did something notorious. He openly challenged 35 heavenly officials. The challenge was to spar with the martial gods and debate with the civil gods. And we know that there were martial gods up there on the mountain because they're the ones that fought with Xie Lian. But not all of them did, which meant not all of them were martial gods. Some of them were probably civil gods. The first to step up to the plate, it said 33 of the 35 thought it was hilarious, but were also infuriated enough to take up the challenge, thinking they could join forces to teach this little devil a thing or two. So I'm guessing it was right when he got out of Mount Tonglu. The first thing he did, the first person on his list when he became a supreme ghost was, I'm going to go back to those 33 assholes who bullied Xie Lian and led him down this path, and I'm going to kick their ass. Like, that was the first thing he did. He was like, I'm going to go challenge these 33 heavenly officials who ruined my gege's life as he was descended and show them what for, right? So the first to step up to the plate were the martial gods. The martial gods were the strongest of the heavenly officials. Each had plenty of believers and were all powerful. In the face of a newborn ghost, it was a sure win. A newborn ghost. Even their weapons, but yet unexpectedly, it turned out to be complete annihilation after one battle. Even their weapons were smashed to pieces by Hua Cheng's freakish scimitar. So, by the time that he gets out of Mount Tonglu, right? By the time he's out, it's like, we graduated from Mount Tonglu Academy. Graduated from Mount Tonglu. He was a grad. He made a Ming, we're assuming, either before he got out of Mount Tonglu or afterwards. And they challenged the 35 and defeated 33. The connection back to it. And so anyway, as we find out, it says that it was only after the battle they found out that Hua Cheng was born of Mount Tonglu. Mount Tonglu was a volcano, and within its mountainous domain there was a city called Gu. The city of Gu wasn't a place where people cultivated poison, but the city itself was a great venom. So I forgot about that. So Wuyang, it feels like Gu and Wu. Wuyang is the city of Gu, right? Is that what they're referring to? Within Tonglu is the city of Gu, which I don't think it's been addressed in the last couple volumes about the city of Gu. We just know it's Wuyang. So there's that. Every few hundred years, tens of thousands of ghosts descend upon the city of Gu to butcher one another until at last only one remained and the venom was brewed. It usually ended in complete annihilation, but those few who were capable enough to make it out alive would emerge as the devil incarnate. So we know Heshan, Hua Cheng, and we're assuming Bai Wuxiang is one of them as well. Only 2 such ghosts ever made it out of the city of Gu in the past several centuries. As expected, they became known as Ghost Kings, and Hua Cheng was one. So it says in the past several centuries. So that leads to the idea that Bai Wuxiang could have came out of Mount Tonglu as well. It just was a lot earlier than Hua Cheng and Heshan. Not going to rule that out. So, after the defeat of the martial gods, it came time for the civil gods to rise to the challenge. Surely Hua Cheng could fight, but not debate. Unfortunately for the civil gods, they could not defeat him. He could recite the classics and debate the contemporaries. He was sometimes polite, sometimes vicious, sometimes unyielding, sometimes incisive, and sometimes quibbling. He was impenetrably sharp, his arguments flawless. He verbally abused the civil gods from top to bottom, past to present, and infuriated them so much they puked blood and washed the skies red. He gained fame overnight. However, that alone wasn't enough to call him scary. What was scary that after the challenge, Hua Cheng demanded all 33 officials make good on their word. Before the challenge, it was decided that if Hua Cheng were to lose, he would offer up his own ashes. If the officials were to lose, they have to descend from the heavens and return to being mortals. If it weren't for his arrogant attitude and his decisive stake and the conviction of the 33 officials that they would not lose, they never would have accepted such terms. So yeah, he's like, you're going to honor your word, right? You're going to honor it, right? Like you didn't for Xie Lian. Oh, you're not. So you're exactly like you were to him, huh? Okay. But they didn't. But it was humiliating to renege on their bet. But then they thought about it. If only one of them was defeated, it'd be embarrassment. But if all of them were defeated and humiliated, then no one would lose face. They could even turn around and mock the other party. So they came to the understanding that they'd pretend nothing had happened. The mortals were forgetful anyway, and they'd forget about this in 50 years or so. They were not wrong about the mortals, but they were wrong about Hua Cheng. So the crazy thing is the mortals did forget. It's like them sealing their own fate. The mortals forgot about them and the battle, and they all just kind of collapsed, but Hua Cheng did not forget. Thus, Hua Cheng burned every single temple and shrine of all 33 gods. They refused to fill their promise. That was fine. He'd give them a hand. I was like, oh my God! This stuff of nightmares for the gods in heavens, the red-clad ghost burning of the 33 martial and civil gods' temples, and it talks about how the temples are the source of power, and so it would take at least 100 years to rebuild them, and even then they wouldn't be the same as before. This was a catastrophe greater than failing in transcending tribulation, so it's greater than failing a calamity. The number of temples and shrines those heavenly officials combined was at least tens of thousands, but he burned them all in a single night. How? No one knew, but he did it. Pure madness. And no one was hurt. Yeah, I love it. I freaking love it. Hua Cheng. And so then the final page of the chapter, if we get to it, talks about how the gods cried foul to the heavenly emperor, but there was nothing he could do. I kind of like that because, again, Junwu has been really forgiving of Xie Lian and kind of understanding and, like, patient with him. And so I kind of, it's almost like a little bit of shade on Junwu's part that the 33 bullies went to Junwu and they're like, oh, make us not have to be punished. And Junwu's like, you signed up for this. I can't do anything. Right? I kind of like that about Junwu. And he's like, the heavenly officials accepted the challenge and the terms, and Hua Cheng was cunning enough to destroy the temples without hurting anyone. And so, at first, the 33 heavenly officials had wanted to show the world the defeat of this crazed little devil. So they broadcast the challenge into the dreams of many nobles and royals to display their strength and might before their most devout believers. But all the royals and nobles saw was their miserable defeat. When the mortals woke up, they switched from worshiping them to worshiping the ghost. And that's, again, tied to this because all the heavenly officials saw of Xie Lian was that he was a robber. A wannabe robber. Xie Lian was like, I didn't actually rob anybody. I didn't mean to do this. I need you guys to be on my side. And they weren't. They didn't forgive Xie Lian, and they held him accountable as a failure for that one tiny moment in his entire existence. And so Hua Cheng shows that the mortals did the exact same thing to them. That one loss, they instantly gave up on them, just as they had gave up on Xie Lian. It's poetry. It's poetry. The heavenly officials who lost both their temples and believers grew weaker and weaker until they were erased from existence. It wasn't until a new wave of ascensions the empty positions were filled again. So they not only became, mortals, but they just were erased from existence. And Hua Cheng's like, that's what you get. And so the heavens feared and respected this ghost king. So among the 35 gods who were challenged, the two that declined were Mu Qing and Feng Xin. They thought the challenge was beneath them and didn't care to take it, which tracks for both their personalities, right? Because at that point, they don't realize who Hua Cheng is. They don't know he was the kid. Hua Cheng turned out that was the right decision to make, but even then, Hua Cheng hadn't forgotten about those two. Many of the Zhongyan festival patrols ended in fists and blood when both parties crossed paths with each other, and those crazy maniacal silver butterflies left an everlasting impression on both men. Hearing this, Xie Lian thought of that fluttering silver butterfly that sparkled and danced adorably around him in delight. He could picture it as the described rumors. My favorite part about this is that at the end of this chapter, we find out that, yes, Hua Cheng, even though Feng Xin and Mu Qing didn't fight him, he still chased after them all these years over and over again, being like, you let my gege down. You abandoned him. So Hua Cheng, he kept pestering. He kept pestering Feng Xin and Mu Qing over and over again with the silver butterflies, like he was torturing them, being like, look what you did. I'm going to follow you to the ends of the earth until you pay for what you did to Gege. And then after all that, Xie Lian says at the very end, was that little silver butterfly really that scary? It wasn't that bad. It was kind of cute. Honestly, Xie Lian's savage streak coming out in these chapters and then being emphasized by him just like being like, F it, I'm kind of into this. I'm all for it. I'm for it. I'm here for it. All right. Good for you, Xie Lian. After everything you've gone through, sure. And so Xie Lian, he's being called a robber by these heavenly officials. He's being teased and tormented, and he's just trying to deny it. And then he finally is like, I'm not leaving. And I love that Xie Lian stands his ground. Like, Xie Lian has, for so long, given up and just moved on and been passive aggressive, been like, okay, if you don't want me here, I guess I'll go, and like gone with his tail between his legs. And here he stands. What's so heartbreaking is he stands up for himself here, right? He stands up for his beliefs. He stands up for himself, only for it to be useless, for it to be pointless. He stands up for himself. He gets in a fight with the heavenly officials, which honestly, I think it says again a lot for Xie Lian's strength, that this guy that's immortal has a cursed shackle, that he's immortal, not immortal, has a cursed shackle, is beating up these heavenly officials with a stick. I mean, at that point, I was like, Hua Cheng, I don't think you had to fight very hard to beat them. Although, what we don't know is how long was this from this? What we don't know is how long. We know it took at least 10 years in Mount Tonglu for Hua Cheng to become a supreme. But what we don't know is how long was it between the 33 heavenly officials getting onto Xie Lian and making him have the worst day ever, to Hua Cheng kicking their asses and destroying them. We don't know how long that was. It was long enough for the 33 heavenly officials to gain a lot of notoriety and become like in the upper court and become some of the strongest heavenly officials there. So some time did pass before, and we know Xie Lian's 800 years old, so we don't know, was it 400 years later? Was it 600 years later? Was it 100 years later? We don't know. But it was long enough for the heavenly officials to not think 50 years is a big deal, right? Because at first they were like, oh, well, 50 years will pass and we'll be fine. It was enough that they didn't think 50 years was a long time. So that's saying something, right? And Xie Lian just being thick-skinned and trying to hold his ground and calling them bullies. They were bullies. They wouldn't just let him be with them. Like, there was no reason. And then Hua Cheng tries to help him as the ghost fire. I love that he goes after their eyes. I think that's like a tie because Hua Cheng is missing an eye that we suspect will become part of Ming. I love that he goes for their eyes to like blind them. But they like catch him, and Xie Lian's like, well, he's not with me. I'm not summoning ghost fire. Like, that's not the case. But then when they try to hurt him, he's like, oh no, don't. And then we assume that Hua Cheng manages to get away. And that's when Mu Qing shows up. Again, it's like damn Qi wrong. I didn't expect him to show up this soon after he left. But it's been a while. I mean, it's been several months. We know by this point it's been several months since Mu Qing left. And Mu Qing shows back up because the heavenly officials asked him to come. And he's wearing the robes of a lower court. So it's clear that for Mu Qing, put Mu Qing on here, that Mu Qing was taken in by someone else. And that hurts a lot. I know why Mu Qing did it. Like I said, I know for a lot of people, Mu Qing's their favorite character. I don't want to know why. Don't want any spoilers, hints, or clues. But I get it. I get why Mu Qing left. Because he'd had enough. He was doing so much. He was overworked. He didn't feel like it was worth it. And I don't blame Mu Qing for leaving because of his mental strain. I don't get mad at him for that. It does suck that he immediately was picked up by somebody else and he wasn't actively trying to, help Xie Lian. But then again, as the Goshi said, if you're going to be in the upper court, you can't focus on the people down in the mortal realm. That's not for you anymore. If you want to be a heavenly official, you've got other fish to fry. And it's like, well, if he's trying to do that, that makes sense. But in this moment, when Xie Lian is at his worst, Mu Qing ignores him. And it hurts. And it hurts. And Xie Lian, what hurts about it is that Xie Lian is like, he gets the scenario and he's like, wow, this is so ironic. I'm here, kind of where you were, Mu Qing, and now you're where I was, and we've switched shoes. And the thing that sucks about it is that at the time, Xie Lian reached out a hand and helped Mu Qing. And it goes back to when Mu Qing was being bullied by the men in the temple. And Xie Lian chased them off and reached out a hand and was like, I'll help you. And now that the tables have turned and Xie Lian's like, I need help, I need a hand. In front of his friends, his new friends, he doesn't hold out the hand. He waits until they leave. And then he helps out Xie Lian. And that's what I don't like. That's what pisses me off. Because I'm like, oh, you want to help Xie Lian, but you want to save face. You don't want to look bad in front of your new friends. So you don't want to be known hanging out with the nerdy kid, with the kid that's not liked. You're above that. You're too good for that. But when they leave, then when their backs are turned, you'll go over and help Xie Lian out. I wanted to cry because Xie Lian gets it. Because Mu Qing is like, well, I don't have a choice. And Xie Lian's like, well, of course you don't. You're trying to like make a name for yourself and move up on the ladder. And I'm at the bottom of the ladder, not able to move up anymore. And so what choice do you have? You know? And what's so sad is that Xie Lian, you know, all these, I feel for Mu Qing in the fact that he's kind of torn between these two parties. I feel for Mu Qing in that these heavenly officials that he's trying to like associate with, he's trying to move up the ladder, and they're like, aren't you going to help us? And at first Mu Qing doesn't take a stance. And then Xie Lian's like, Mu Qing, aren't you going to help me? You know? And then the heavenly officials start, what sucks though is that the heavenly officials start gaslighting him. They're like, oh, well, Mu Qing's not going to help us because he's been friends with Xie Lian and blah, blah. And instead of Mu Qing telling them, being like, guys, I'm trying to take the high road here and not get involved. You started this mess. You end it with Xie Lian. Instead of doing anything like that, that's when he like pushes Xie Lian away because he's like, oh no, I'm trying to save face. And instead of taking charge and telling the heavenly officials, like, I'm being the responsible one here. You guys settle your mess and then let's go. We've got enough ground to cover. We'll let him have this little mountain and we'll go find our own place. It'll be fine. Instead of doing that, he slaps the stick out of Xie Lian's hand and tells him to leave. And Xie Lian's like, I hadn't really wanted to rob anyone. I wasn't going to take over this land either. I came here first. I wanted to share it. And he says, leave. And the moment Xie Lian's like, you know I'm not lying, right? And Xie Lian's like, he's hopeful, but he's scared. He's like, don't ask anymore, just turn around and walk away. But he's like, I want Mu Qing to know that I'm not a bad person. That I really am. And what kills me is that Mu Qing's been in the same position. He was in the same position being like, Xie Lian, you know I didn't steal the pearl. You know I didn't do this, right? I'm not lying. And Xie Lian believed him and welcomed him back and being like, of course you're not lying. Come on, let's go. And now that the shoe's on the other foot, Mu Qing doesn't offer him that same courtesy because it would make Mu Qing look less than what he is. And he's trying to move up the corporate ladder. And for Mu Qing, gaining that power and becoming a heavenly official is more important than his friendship. Oh, it's hard. Oh, it's hard. It's hard indeed. Yes, sirree, Bob. And to make matters worse, the cherry on top of the Mu Qing not happy cake is Xie Lian is like, he falls to his knees and he's like, Mu Qing, I don't know what to do. And then one of the heavenly officials kicks him to the ground, like adding insult to injury. And Mu Qing turns his back to him. Like he's sprawled out in the ground covered in mud. And Mu Qing just stands there and he's standing not far away, but he's not looking at him. Not trying to help him up. Not trying to be the better person. Like Mu Qing could have set a good example right then and there. He could have been like, hey guys, and helped Xie Lian up and been like, go on, get out. He doesn't even offer him a hand. He just stands away and doesn't do a thing. And then Xie Lian like getting up and like running down the hill because he's so sad. And he's like just running fast. It's like a kid crying it's like a kid's just been bullied and his best friend just like completely betrayed him. And he just runs down the hill crying like, I just can't do it anymore. You know? I know why Hua Cheng's pissed at him. I know why Hua Cheng hates Mu Qing. It makes all the sense now. It makes all the sense. This wasn't about Hua Cheng losing the promotion. Hua Cheng seeing everything that Mu Qing has done to Xie Lian. Oh no, and we still don't even know what that conversation was about, but Hua Cheng's like, I know what you've done. And And then, of course, when Xie Lian gets to the bottom of the hill, that's when Mu Qing shows up. And he's like, hey, get up. Are you all right? And I'm like, I was like, at that point, what good does it do? You completely betrayed him up there. You didn't try to help him at all. And now that nobody's looking, you want to do it? I was like, I don't blame Xie Lian for not taking the hand. It's very immature when he throws the mud at him, though. But at that point, he's just like, Xie Lian's just mad at everything. Xie Lian's just mad because nobody is helping him. And he feels betrayed by everything. And so he's just mad, throwing mud at anything that's there. It's not just Mu Qing. But of course, again, Mu Qing doesn't know, or he should, but he doesn't know the links of Xie Lian's despair. And then Mu Qing's like, well, I didn't have a choice. And Xie Lian's like, he doesn't answer. He just keeps getting mad and throwing things. And Mu Qing is like, didn't I just tell you I didn't have a choice? Didn't you go rob because you also didn't have a choice? And I'm like, it's not the same. It's not the same for me, because at that point, I'm like, Xie Lian went to go rob because you left and you weren't helping. So I was like, Xie Lian, it's like such a cause and effect. It's like Mu Qing's like, well, you didn't have a choice but to rob. And I'm like, no, he didn't have a choice because you left him. And because him and Feng Xin couldn't do it on their own. And now you had a choice to reach out your hand and do something, and you said no. I can't believe this book has made me so angry. And so then Mu Qing just leaves him. And that's the thing too. What I love about Hua Cheng is that throughout everything that's happened, Hua Cheng never gave up on Xie Lian. He never gave up, right? Because if they're a true friend, you don't give up on them, right? And I feel for Feng Xin, because I get the impression that Feng Xin is going to get driven away by Xie Lian. Mu Qing asked to leave and left, but I have a feeling Xie Lian's going to tell Feng Xin to leave. I just have that impression, but I don't know. I could be wrong. They established in the story that Feng Xin left, but I'm like, I don't know. But, and Xie Lian's just sitting there until night falls. And right now, everybody else thinks that he's off, he's off doing his thing and it's fine. But in the meantime, Xie Lian's actually like heartbroken and just miserable. I wanted to look up, I was trying to say phosphorescent. Phosphorescent. It's like neon. It's like a photoluminescent related to fluorescent. Okay. And it's like the substance will glow and absorb light and emit this wavelength. It's unlike fluorescent. Phosphorescent material does not immediately remit radiation it absorbs. So yeah, interesting. So yeah, these phosphorescent flames are like, they're like green and neon, and they're like luminescent almost. It's kind of eerie. Again, it's like an electric eel. It's like an electric eel. They're like flotsam and jetsam. Hello, Xie Lian. Like, oh my God. Yes. So these phosphorescent flames, a large number of them came floating and dancing hauntingly around him. It was as if Xie Lian didn't see them and didn't bother up any strength, but they seemed to be upset that they weren't being noticed, and they gathered by his side. I love it. I love that Bai Wuxiang. It's interesting that Bai Wuxiang can take the form of these phosphorescent flames, or they're his minions, and he's just like like this neon. He's like, he came from a rave. Bai Wuxiang came like, oh my God, Xie Lian, what's going on? Like, came from a rave to see him, and a person appeared from within in all white. Half a mask on his face was smiling. How are you, Your Highness? Oh my God. So yeah, he's shown up like the devil incarnate. And I have no doubt that he's watched everything that's happened. He's been waiting till Xie Lian's been at his lowest point. For whatever reason, we don't know. But he's been waiting for Xie Lian to get to his lowest point. And I feel like he's gonna make a deal with him somehow, being like, I'll get you money, I'll get you things, I'll help you. But the price you pay to get me to help you is not going to be good. I feel like Bai Wuxiang was waiting until Xie Lian had been dismissed by the heavenly officials to be like, okay, the heavenly officials aren't going to come to his aid. Now I'm going to strike. And that's where we go to from here. I've talked for a long time about this, haven't I? Oh, over an hour. Yeah. These volumes are giving me lots to talk about. I'm just heartbroken. I really am for Xie Lian, because Xie Lian's just at his lowest point, and the one person who wants to protect and love him no matter what is powerless. I get now why Hua Cheng is like, I have to get powerful to protect him, because he's like, this boyfriend of mine has had some stuff happen to him. So anyway, next week is going to be part 60, chapters 187 to 189, pages 201 to 236. Not a big old chunk, but a chunk indeed. The week after that is one chapter, but that one chapter is nearly 30 pages, which is terrifying to me. So I'm going to do chapters 187 to 189 next week, and then the following week I'm just going to be doing chapters 190, because for some reason it's a big old chapter and that bothers me. So I was going to do all of them, but I was like, that's nearly 60 pages. Normally, when we were back at chapters 175 to 179, 50 to 60 pages was extremely good. I was like, oh, bring it on. Now, 50 or 60 pages of this sounds horrifying. So, in any case, I'm excited to know your thoughts down below. There was one picture with this set of chapters. It's going to be the thumbnail. It's very sad. It's Xie Lian at his lowest point, and he's very sad because he's telling Hua Cheng he's like the ghost fire. It's him and the jar of wine. Very sad days. But yeah, no Manhua chapter next week. We're going to skip that and then come back and have a Manhua chapter later on. So, yay. In the meantime, though, yeah, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Or I might wait. You know what? I'm recording this ahead. I might wait until the Manhua chapter comes out and do that. I might. I'm recording this really early because I have to be gone next weekend. So that's the only reason I'm recording it early. So I might actually wait until the next Manhua chapter comes out. Get lots of comments and then come back for that. So we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But yeah, in any case, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. We'll see what happens. We'll see if I'm feeling it. I don't know if I'm going to be able. I don't know. That would be waiting 2 weeks for a new chapter. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. So we probably won't have a Manhua chapter next week, but we'll just wait and see. So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Heaven Officials Blessing.